Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Naruto Befriended Oldest Dragon. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. He was dying. Balerion could feel in his old bones. After hundreds of years, death had come for him at long last. He could cling on a while longer, he knew. Persist perhaps a few years more before his body finally failed him. But what point was there? Many of his kith and kin were long dead. Only a fading legacy remained. Egon, his first rider, long passed. Meager, his second, had followed soon thereafter. His third, the prince, Viserys, was a weak man who had only ridden him once and never dared again. Hager, his only living sibling from the day of hatching, was far from here. She at least might mourn his death, but she'd never reach him in time no matter how hard she flew. It was time. A small part of him mourned this ignoble end. If he was to die, he wished to die hard, going out in a blaze of glory, not to simply wither and waste away into old age. There was no glory in this death. He was the Dread, a lord of dragons, last to see old Valeria before the doom. And yet now, he could scarcely lift his wings, let alone his head. His fire had faded. Only embers remained. You too, huh? Balerion creaked, an ancient eye open. A man stood before him, at least the old worm assumed it was such. He was so bright, almost blindingly so. He burned like the sun itself. Balerion could not see his face. His own weakened vision coupled with the man's radiance made it impossible. Back in his prime he would have snapped him up in a single bite. Now it was all he could do to growl. Easy, no. The man drawled. I'm not here to fight. I was wondering what I sensed all the way out here. He laid a golden palm on his snout. Strange man. Who was he? What did he want? Balerion rumbled a question. I've lived a long time too, you know. The man's forehead touched his scales. Too long. Everyone I ever knew is dead and gone. But you'll remember me, won't you, I think. His palm pulsed. There could be no other word for it. ... That you need this more than I do. Here, take it. Take it all. Strength flowed into Balerion, bright and heady to shimmer beneath his bones. His fading fire blazed anew, his eyes shimmering with molten flame. He felt young again. Powerful. There we go. A life for a life. The golden man sagged against him, dimmer than before. Make good use of it. Here at last, Balerion glimpsed blue eyes framed by whiskered cheeks and blonde hair, streaked through with gray. Live on a little longer, will you live? The old man grinned up at him, fingers weaving together, forming a strange series of symbols he couldn't comprehend. And someday, we'll see each other again. The light flared one last time, so bright that Balerion was forced to close his eyes against it. When he opened them again, the man of light was gone. Only a battered headband remained. She was dying. Royce could feel it, feel her body tearing open on the birthing bed. Every instant was pain. Every second, agony, torment upon torment, peaking as she screamed. Damn that demon. A pox upon the Targaryen bastard. She'd only laid with him once, and he'd brought this upon her. She'd gotten him drunk out of spite on their wedding day, if only to teach him a lesson. Even the Vale sheep are prettier, he'd said. She wanted to make him eat those words. Uglier than a sheep was she. She'd shown him. ... Or so she'd thought at the time. More fool she hadn't been able to rid herself of this child. His child. Oh, she had tried at first. She tried and tried and tried, but day by day, week by week, month by month, the life within her only grew stronger. Eventually she'd given up. Now she would bring this child into the world, if only to spite him. Push, my lady, the midwife urged her. You must push. Reed did so with a howling scream, one she was certain all of Runestone heard. By the old gods and knew, the pain it went on and on and on without end, her hands fisted in the sheets as she prayed for release. At long last an angry wail answered her, almost as angry as she was. She slumped against her pillows, spent. Dimly, she heard the Meister's voice. It's a boy, my lady. A son, pity. She'd hoped for a girl. Let me see him. Soon enough the cord was cut and he was pressed into her arms, wrapped in clean blue linen. She touched his face with trembling fingers. His complexion was healthy while his hair pale, almost silvery blonde, his eyes a deep, striking violeton blue. Odd, were those whiskers on his cheeks? Tried to speak his name, the one she'd thought of for him. ... But she couldn't. Something compelled her to say another. Naruto. Her tongue betrayed her as surely as the realm had. His name is Naruto. Rhea held him in her arms, rocking him to and fro. He stared up at her and grew quiet, almost eerily so. Gods above, she felt so faint, so tired, so very tired. Her eyes began to droop, despite her best attempts to keep them open. A dragon's roar shook the keep and hauled her back from the brink. Her heart leaped into her throat, and not at all in a good way. She clutched her son close to her, ignorant of the delighted noise he made. No, it couldn't be. She'd not said a word to anyone. Kept herself in seclusion the moment her belly began to swell. The hand of the king couldn't have spies here, surely. So how? She heard raised voices. Heavy footfalls. Coming closer now. The door flung itself open. A knight fell through and he walked over their stunned form. Don't get up on my account. There it was. That voice. That damn indefatigable voice. So smug, so arrogant. Clad in full armor and smelling of dragon, demon Targaryen marched into the room, helmet tucked under one. He took one look at her, then at the babe in her arms, and her wide bed, and his smile faded. He looked as horrified as she felt right now. Ree took some bitter pleasure in that. For once in his life, the prince was utterly speechless. Good. Served him right. What do you want? She rasped at him. Come to humiliate me again. He took a single silent step forward, heedless of her glare. The Meister stepped aside for him. Coward. No one dared defy a Targaryen, least of all the heir to the Iron Throne. She tried to turn away, but he was too quick. He tugged the cloth back from the babe and saw his face, his eyes, his hair. She heard the sharp intake of breath that followed. It was a mercy he didn't rip the boy from her arms then and there. He would soon, she knew. She'd lost too much. It had been a difficult birth. Too difficult. She could see her word going dark at the edges, feel herself slipping away. I hope you're happy. Spite flashed in his eyes as she sneered at him. You've killed me. This boy, your boy, killed me. Demon looked to the Meister. The man shook his head. His silence infuriated Ree. Nothing to say, she snarled. He looked to her at last. ... For what it's worth, I may not have loved you, but I never wished this upon you. His words rattled her more than she cared to admit. I didn't want you to die. Not like this. Lies, deceit, and trickery. A fine job you've done, then. Silence was his answer. No, she wouldn't let these be her last words. The boy's name ... is Naruto. Ree could feel herself growing faint, now, loss at last taking its toll. You take care of him, you hear. She grabbed at his arm, clasping it with trembling fingers, and shoved her son at him. Don't you dare cast him aside. Promise me, demon. For once in your miserable, spoiled life, do the right thing. Promise me. Tell me you'll protect him. Say you'll keep him safe. Promise me. His gaze flitted to the babe. His grip shifted to hold him, cradling him. Ree could hold on no longer. She fell into the darkness. Her final thoughts lay with her boy. He had to live. He must live. A son. He had a son. Demon hadn't expected a son. What in the nine hells was he going to do with a son? What could he? That blasted had left him with one final insult. This was all her fault. He hadn't thought much of one night of drunken passion. Why would he, when he hadn't heard from her since he'd wanted nothing to do with her at the time, nor she him? He'd only found out about the birth purely through chance. Damn that slithering snake of a Hightower. He remembered the smirk on his face, the smile when he'd told him. I understand, congratulations are in order. He'd cuffed him on the jaw and flown straight here on Carax's ... just in time to watch her die. Damn it. Damn it all to the seven hells. If he had known the damn Royce woman was with child before this, he would have done nothing. A nasty little voice, his voice whispered to him. You hated her. She hated you, and you ... how you don't want to be a father. Let us kill the boy and be done with it. Demon recoiled. He'd done many things, many dark deeds, but to kill a baby, a boy with his. What am I to do with you? At a loss, he gazed down at the infant. He was no father. In truth, he'd never wanted to be. Yet for him to have a son while Viserys, his own brother, struggled to produce one ... it felt like destiny. He was still the heir, which would make this boy his heir. So silent. The boy wasn't making a sound. He was just looking at him. My lord. Blast, he'd forgotten all about the Meister. Steeling himself, he tucked the boy against his and marched up to the old man. The Meister stood his ground, balked a little as he pressed the babe into his arms. Find a nurse for him, he commanded. As soon as he's fit to travel, he'll be brought to King's Landing. High above, he heard Carax's roar in triumph. Balerion woke slowly. Age had left his old bones sore, slumber more so, but here at last, he was awake. He'd felt something just now, an old tremor in his ancient bones. Curious. There had been a shift in the world, an awakening. He felt it, so far, so distant, yet he knew it all the same. He had clung to his life in the hopes of feeling that presence once more, slept to marshal his newfound strength. So many years of sleep, waking only to eat, stretch his wings, and rest again. He hadn't flown in years, yet he had lived, and now, he felt it, his return. The man who had given his life for his, born again into the world. He wasn't the only one to notice. He could hear the dragons down in King's Landing, their cries echoing from the dragon pit across the seven kingdoms. Carax is in Vale, roaring at the mountains. The Hager from her distant perch, even that damnable rogue down in Dragonstone, he who feasted upon their own kind. All the dragons cried out to celebrate his birth. Balerion laid his mighty head down upon the coast and contented himself to wait. Perhaps he had reason to live a while yet. They would soon meet again. May they meet again. There was something wrong with his son. By the time Demon noticed, it was already too late. No malady of the body this, no, Naruto's sickness ran far deeper. His boy had proven himself skilled in every subject he set himself to. Indeed, he studied his histories and trained relentlessly. Spear, shield, staff, he mastered them all. He learned to ride a horse almost as well as he did Carax's. His talent with the bow and blade were unsurpassed, with his wit thrice as sharp. Not yet 17, and he already spoke Valyrian as if he'd been born to it and got on well with his younger cousins. And yet for all that, he was kind. Too kind by half. Demon knew it, Viserys knew it, and he was certain that Kanado Hightower did as well. Today was no different. He found the boy down in the dragon pit as he often did these days, fussing over Caraxes. There was some irony to be had there. Caraxes despised most people, even other Targaryens. He'd eaten men for glancing at him askance before, and yet he tolerated Naruto. More than that, the worm allowed him to feed him and clean his scales, a feat denied even the most stoic of dragon keepers. At this very moment, he had him eating out the palm of his hand like some mewling hatchling. Although they weren't bonded, the slender dragon was always happy to see him. Most dragons acted like that in his presence. What advisories called him once he who is loved by dragons. Sometimes that title worried him, more than he cared to admit. Why not bond yourself to a proper dragon, he called out to him as he approached. Gods know you're old enough now. Many of them seem quite fond of you. Why, his son looked up with a smirk, idly stroking Carx's crimson chin, drawing a pleased trill from the worm as he did. The one I want still has a rider. Demon quirked a brow. Oh, you know the one. Curious. This was the most he'd spoken about it in years. He watched the boy fling up a fish from the basket at his feet, watched now as the worm snapped it up with all due haste. A second, then a third. The one he wanted still had a rider, which one indeed, not Carax's certainly, and not Syrax. Renaira would never allow it. Seasmoke wasn't a factor either at that. Only the gods knew where Vihager was these days, and they'd already refused Vermithor. Which left... Oh. Realization dawned. He barked a laugh and clapped his son on the back. You certainly don't lack for ambition, do you? He grinned as Carax's returned to his feast. You taught me well. He certainly had, hadn't he? That said, I'm thinking about visiting the slums tomorrow. There it was. Not this trite tripe again. His son cared too much for the common folk. They were dragons. What need did they have for sheep? What's the point in giving those peasants money? He clicked his tongue and shook his head. It's ink Fleabottom. A bit of coin won't change that. His boy rounded on him. Then I will make it better. He patted his shoulder. You can try. Haven't you? Naruto stood his ground, heedless of the still feasting Caraxes in the background. I heard what you did with the city watch the other day. How many hands did you take? How many heads did you put on a spike? A glint of pearly white teeth flashed in a rare snarl. I can't seem to recall. Didn't you need a cart to carry all their bits away? Careful now. Demon enjoyed the challenge, but he didn't like his tone just now. That was different. How so? His boy, his stubborn, proud, defiant boy, squared his shoulders, stood his ground, and lifted his chin to look up at him. You put those criminals in their place, which was all well and good, but you did it with no thought to the families left behind. How will they fend for themselves now? This is the right thing to do. Was it? He disagreed. But he saw the fire in the boy's eyes. You're going to be stubborn about this, aren't you? That depends. Demon at his head. Oh, and how much of an arse you're going to be today? Naruto shook his hand free with a huff and stormed off. The robe prince followed his son with a weather eye. And where do you think you're going? Somewhere far away from you, came the irritated shout. As you wish. But stay away from that Hightower girl. A long finger rose to deliver a snarky salute. Demon watched him go with a shake of the head. There'd be no stopping him today. Too kind, this son of his. Far too kind by half. Hopefully it wouldn't get him killed. Naruto loved King's Landing. Not the politics, he disdained those, but rather the people. So many places to see, so many secrets to ferret out, so much to do. For if King's Landing was his home, then the Red Keep was truly his oyster. What an oyster it was! He'd always craved a large family, and now here in his second life, he finally had one. Such a large family. Demon aside, he had his uncle Viserys, Aunt Ema, and little cousin Renaira, to say nothing of his Velaryon relations. And of course, the dragons. One mustn't forget the dragons. So many dragons. Even after all these years, he still hadn't bonded with one despite having his pick of the lot. Because you see, he only sought him. The one, the greatest of them all, Lord of Dragons, Balerion the Black Dread, lived. He was nowhere to be found in King's Landing these days. Not anymore. He had outgrown the dragon pit ages ago and flown far away, leaving his last living rider behind. Doubtless most thought him dead. Still he sensed him all the same, out there somewhere to the east. Distant, but strong. Tired, yet alert. Watching. Or perhaps he was waiting, he couldn't be sure. In saving his life on that fateful day long ago, he'd forged an unbreakable bond with that weary old worm. But bond or no, he had no true way of communicating with him at this distance, much less summoning him. Balerion would return when he wished. Not before, and when he finally did. Well, those were thoughts for another time. But before that, he skirted a pair of handmaidens in the hall, daring a quick smile in their wake. Is that him? He's proper handsome. SHHH, quiet, he'll hear you. The ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. A quick look back sent them scurrying in a gaggle of giggles. He was well aware of their fleeting whispers and their retreat, just as he knew what others called him behind his back. For if his father was the rogue prince, then he was the renegade, the reprobate, the fanciful fool who threw money at Fleabottom, who would rather talk than fight, an oaf who tried to make everything better. A renegade indeed, he quite liked that title. The irony stuck. Let them think what they liked. He hardly cared. A distant glimmer of light in a nearby tower window caught his eye. A lone candle was burning within. He tilted his head toward it, testing the evening breeze with one finger. Wind's howling today. Wonder if she's awake. He looked to the Tower of the Hand and grinned. The hour was late, the sun beginning to set, painting the Red Keep in deep shades of an omen. Perhaps he shook his head to clear it. A meandering stride carried him toward the tower. Curious, shouldn't there be guards on duty at this hour? Yet he saw no one. Naruto looked left. Naruto looked right. Made certain no guards were near, no one to see nor hear. Then he raced up the wall, running full tilt. Once more, Alyson lit the candle tonight. It had become something of a ritual for her in recent years, a habit she'd picked up when she was very small and spending her first nights in the Red Keep. Every night she left a burning candle at her open window. Every night, she burned the wick down to nothing. The act brought her some small semblance of comfort these days, like a tiny spark raging against the dark. Having trouble sleeping. By the 7, Alicent yelped and nearly jumped clean out of her green dress. Must you do that every time? Yes, we must. The prince grinned at her as he swung his way in through the window, careful to avoid the candle there. Oh, don't make that face. You missed us. ... She really had. He'd been gone for so long this time she'd thought he might not return from Dragonstone. How he rid her so easily, she knew not. Demon's son was a bit of an odd dragon, even among his own kind. She didn't quite understand how he got in and out of her quarters so easily. Surely no one cold climbed the towers so quickly as he. Frankly, he made even less sense than Rhaenyra these days. Oh gods, he was giving her that look again. She quirked a brow at him and spoke quickly, if only to avert his gaze. The royal we, is it? Naruto grinned at her, set the candle aside, and sketched a deep bow, knee bent and one arm to his. The very same. She felt her lips quirk into a small smile despite it all. You shouldn't be here at this hour. If my father saw you. He stood and rolled his eyes. He'd piss and stamp his feet and do nothing. What about it? Such an odd dragon. Heat seared through her face and turned her ears red. She didn't know what the prince saw in her, let alone what compelled these nighttime visits of his. Father would not approve. He didn't like Demon or his son. It would take much to change that. And yet if things didn't change, if King Viserys never had a Sano, she mustn't think that. Such thoughts were foul, the most treacherous of treason. Distractions. She needed to distract herself, now more than ever. How was Dragonstone? Wet and warm and boring. Naruto drawled. Though we could work on your high Balerion again tonight. He picked up the candle from the windowsill, paced past her to the bed, snatching a heavy tome from the table as he went. In a matter of moments he was sat upon it, the tome spread open upon his legs. While the prince looked to her. What are you waiting for? Alicent pulled a face, idly wringing her hands as she resisted the urge to pick at her fingernails. You know I'm not very good, hence the lessons. He set the candle down and thumped an open palm between the pages. Come on, where's the harm? Everywhere sitting right before her. Are you really that afraid of me, Alicent? Naruto ran his hand over the candle as he spoke, idly curling his fingers into a fist before opening them again. The motion was strangely hypnotic. No matter how long his hand lingered over the open flame, it did not burn. His flesh did not blacken and char, nor did his sleeve burst into flame. Pale tongues of fire passed over his palm, leaving him unharmed. Despite her best effort, Alicent found her gaze lingering. She'd seen this feat before and wondered how he did it. A trick, perhaps. For all their claims to the contrary, not all Targaryens were immune to fire. And what of you? She sat beside him. Her free hand touched his. Aren't you afraid of being burnt? I don't fear fire, he hummed, idly staring into the flame. It's quite comfortable, really. No, those bright orbs swung back to her, haunting in their intensity. What I fear is the dirt. Being lowered into a box, my body left to rot. He shook his head with a rueful sigh. That won't be my fate. Her fingers curled around his. Just a hint. Just a touch. Then what is your fate? Naruto smiled a little at that. Would you like to know? He was so close to her. So very terribly close. Alicent found herself leaning forward. Wait. He held up a hand. She flinched. What? Naruto kept his hand up, but his gaze was no longer on her. Do you hear that? Alicent at her head. I don't hear anything. Nothing at all. He let go of her. That's just it. I don't hear anything. His eyes widened. Oh no. He was still speaking when door to her room burst open, ripped from its hinges by a powerful blow. Then boiled in, swords in hand. Stunned though she was by the sudden intrusion, Alicent had time enough to count them. 5, clad all in black. Rough men. Dangerous men. Not her father's men. What were they doing here? Where were the guards? How had they gotten past them? How ... Oh gods. She saw the on their blades and she knew. There she is. A leader, a great giant of a man, thrust a beefy finger at her. That's the one. Take her. She'll fetch a fine price. One of them looked to Naruto. That's the White Prince. He's not supposed to be here. Doesn't matter. A third muttered. He's a witness. Kill him. Alicent shrieked. Guards, help. The moment she cried out, Naruto sprang up and flung his book at the nearest man. It struck the fool, and the less so too did the dagger that followed in its wake. The would-be killer pitched back, steel sprouting from his right eye. His corpse crashed into one of his fellows, dead before he struck the floor. And then the prince was among them. A single leap carried him forward at speed, close enough to catch a second man unawares well before he could bring his blade to bear. He kicked upright with a wordless snarl, caught him by the skull and dashed it against the wall. Bashed his head in, pulping it against the stone and drawing his sword in the same instant. Steel sang from its sheath. He flung the borrowed blade across the room. It skewered a third in the throat. He dropped with a wet gurgle. The remaining duo paused, taken aback by his sudden savagery. Kill him, you fool. The leader brayed. He's just a boy. You have swords, use them. The second stepped back. A boy doesn't move like that. Oh gods, here he comes again. Rasengan. Alicent didn't truly see what happened next. Not really. She glimpsed a shining something into the prince's hand, and then another man was gone, reduced to gristly red chunks upon the ground. Spattered in, the leader bellowed a challenge and lunged forward. Naruto swept his legs, cuffed him hard across the jaw, and dropped him like a sack of potatoes. He fell like a stone, stricken senseless, but well alive. All this is in an instant. Alicent crumpled to her knees, stunned by it all. Oh, her dress. It was ruined, spattered in. Naruto stood, wiped a bit from his face, then looked to her. I'm going to get the guards. Do you trust me? Alicent sputtered, still dazed. What? He offered her a Y hand. Do you trust me? Trembling fingers curled around his and held tight. Yes. Naruto's white face dimpled in a small smile. Then don't let go. He took her by the hand and swept her into his arms. Then he ran. An attack in my own home? Who would do such a thing? Viseries and the small council were furious. Rightly so. Naruto would have been furious with them if they weren't. Anger was to be expected after such a brazen attack, horror only natural. But the outrage he glimpsed on the faces assembled before him only cemented his own. He brought himself in a Y Alicent before them with evidence in hand. The rest, as they say, was history. Now it fell to them to puzzle out the culprit. That said, he'd never seen his uncle quite so angry before. Righteous anger was a good look for Viseries. It made him look like a king indeed. He seemed all of an instant from drawing his sword, stalking down to the black cells, and having a word with the surviving prisoner himself. The man would suffer come morning. Naruto almost pitied them. Almost. Do you see now? Lord Valerian's face was darker than thunder. The Triarchy has grown too bold. They strike at us from the stepstones. Here his fist thumped down on the table. In the very heart of King's Landing we must double, no, triple the guard for the tourney. Should the lords of Westeros learn of this? Viseries heaved a sigh. They will not. Yesos Otto spat the word like a curse. They've grown bold. Too bold, if they think they can strike at us here. Agreed. Demon leaned back in his chair. Say the word, brother, and I'll bring fire to the stepstones. Naruto quirked a brow. Miracle of miracles, were they actually agreeing on something? And then Otto ruined everything by turning a pointed glower father's way. Oh, Demon slouched in his seat. You think I had a hand in this? Of course you'd accuse me, you miserable fool. You blame me for everything. Always. My son was there. My son saved your daughter. A lopsided smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I dare say you owe him some gratitude. Perhaps you should be in his boots. Viseries turned to look his way. You fought them off alone. This time, he didn't bother to conceal his smile. I was well taught. Demon preened in his chair. Lionel Strong granted him a grave nod. I would expect no less. The king granted him a careworn smile. Well done, nephew of mine. The hand of the king took the insult with good grace and looked to him instead. Do you recall anything they said, anything at all? Naruto grimaced. Yes, he did. He dearly wished he hadn't. They said she would fetch a high price. Alicent whimpered and tucked herself tighter against his side, all but burying her head in his shoulder. She hadn't let go of his hand since he'd first ferried her out the tower. Not once. He couldn't even blame her. Poor girl was shaken by her brush with death. Anyone in their right mind would be. An absent handy the back of her head as the lords of Westeros denigrated back into baseless bickering. As they did, a small cynical part of him began to wonder who might best stand to benefit from such an attack. Viseries, no. His uncle was a good man, a kind man, and sadly, a weak man. He would never sanction such a thing. Demon might seem the logical conclusion due to his dislike of Otto, but again, there was a flaw there, too. If Demon knew he and Alicent were growing fond of one another, he'd laugh himself silly. He likely already suspected it at that. Everyone would after today's display. Who would want her kidnapped, then? Grand Meister Mello's unlikely. He had nothing to gain from any of this. He looked positively ashen indeed. He hadn't said a word. Master of coin, Lyman Beastberry. The man was old, but he was a firm adherent to the rule of law. Master of laws, Lionel Strong. Honorable. Decent. An ally of Viseries. Another good man. Master of ships, Corlys Velaryon. Now there was a chance. The man was ambitious and he undoubtedly stood to benefit now that the crown's anger was focused firmly on the stepstones. Driftmark would prosper once the Triarchy was burned out of there. But was he bold or desperate enough to risk such a gambit solely for the sake of his ambition? By that very logic, would he really endanger his own daughter to further his own aims? If he hadn't been there, they would have taken her. There could be no doubt about that. Only everything else. The guards had been gone, but he'd seen on the attackers' swords. Had they fought their way into the keep or been let in, killing those who weren't complicit? Questions upon questions, riddles upon riddles. It was enough to make his head ache. He wanted to sleep. But there would be none of that today. Enough. Viseries brought a fist crashing down on the table in a rare show of force, responding to something he hadn't heard. Lord Corlys, we shall tend to the stepstones after the tourney tomorrow. You have my word. Still speaking, he craned his neck to the left. Demon, the prince of the city, sat a bit straighter in his chair, eyes alight. Brother, how many men can you muster on such short notice? A grin. 10,000 should suffice. Lord Velaryon rallied alongside him. I can rally at least half that much. Then let it be done. He rose from his chair and the others followed with a bow. All of you, be on your guard. His keen gaze raked over each of them in turn. Watch over your children. We cannot allow this to happen again. On that, they were in agreement. Maybe he should check in on his other cousins. If someone was bold enough to strike at Otto's own daughter, Rhaenyra and Lena might be marks as well. He suppressed a shiver at the thought. Neither would be able to defend themselves. Attacking the daughter of the hand of the king was one thing, but if they went further, he shuddered to think of the consequences. Viseries was a weak man, a good man, but woe to the fool who tried to lay hand on his family. It was then that weak men were at their strongest. A shadow fell over him as the other lords filtered out. Distracted as he was, he didn't realize who until Alyson hugged him fiercely. "Leave us, my daughter." Otto Hightower loomed over him, blocking his path. "You've more than earned your rest." The implications were left unspoken. She faltered. "Father, please. I merely wish to speak with him." Her eyes flitted between them. Naruto wondered if she'd stick up for herself. ... She found her resolve at the last second, bowed her head, and ... at his cheek. His eyes widened in surprise, but she was already gone, scampering out the open doors. A lone Kingsguard peeled off to escort her on her way. Even then, Otto didn't speak until she rounded the bend. "Why would you stay away from my daughter? Your presence endangers her. Alyson can spend her free time however she wishes." Naruto lifted his chin to scowl up at him. "She isn't your slave, whatever you might think. She is no slave of mine. Our hearts are as one, nothing more." He quirked a blonde brow. "Is that all you have to say to me? If I hadn't been there, she would have been on a barge to Slaver's Bay by now." Otto's jaw clenched as he looked on, muscles working wordlessly as he tried to master himself. He wondered if the man was about to have a "You have ... my thanks." He bit the words out at last. "For my daughter's safe return." Oh, he was going to milk this. "Hell, and you love her." It wasn't a question. Well, damn, he hadn't seen that one coming. Naruto reeled back on his heels a little, unprepared for the sudden statement. It had been so long since he'd thought of such things. He wasn't sure he knew what love was anymore. Not after his first life. He felt like he could learn to, in time. But love it was much too soon for that. For now he enjoyed her company. "I'm fond of her," he retorted at length. "Will you protect her? With my life?" Her father wore a grim smile. Good. Wait, good. Why did he feel like he'd just walked into a trap? He shook his head. No, enough. He'd given Otto more ground than he intended. Time to go. ... This has certainly been a stimulating conversation, but I think I've had enough for one day. Naruto, what do you want, exactly? What do I want? He paused to look over his shoulder. How about peace? How does peace sound, Lord Hand? A furrow rid Otto's face. You jest. I don't. He pivoted back to face him. I simply want peace. But on your terms, the older man countered. He shrugged. My terms are good terms. His part said. He walked away. So long as your father remains heir, there will be no peace. The words caught at him. He paused, blew a quick breath out, and willed his anger to go with it. It's such a sad thing, isn't? What is? How little you trust people. He rubbed two fingers together, tutting softly. You claim to serve the realm, but so often you choose to see the worst in people. Not the best. Is it any wonder you're so paranoid you won't live long with an attitude like that? He kept walking. This time Otto didn't call out. Hi, checkmate. He'd been like that toward the end of his last life. Old, tired, paranoid. In his last go-around he'd lived too long. A long life, memorable perhaps, yet still lacking all the same. He'd outlived his people, his culture, his very civilization, watched his friends and family fade away. No more. This time it would all be his. It was almost funny, really. Once upon the time he would have found the very idea of two lives absurd. He'd used that forbidden jutsu once and he didn't think he'd ever be able to again. But now he was happy here. So he had to win. Win it all. No matter what. Demon caught him before he could complete his escape. Or rather his hand did. He was first made aware of his presence by the hand on his shoulder as he left the council chambers, steering him away from the door. He sighed at it. You're still going to compete tomorrow, I trust. He set his mouth in a firm line. I intend to. Good. His father squeezed his shoulder. Make me proud. A pause, followed as some indiscernible emotion flashed across his face. I am ... glad you are unharmed. He drew him into a bruising embrace and squeezed him fiercely. Naruto found himself returning it. That was as much affection as he could expect, given what had happened. I taught you well, boy. If anyone comes for you, I'll leave one alive to question. His brow furrowed. What's going to be done with the prisoner? Oh, I suspect they'll be quiet talkative once we're through with them. Naruto blinked. Wait, Demon patted him on the back. Nothing you need concern yourself with. I don't know. A man's wail split the black cells. Interrogation by fire was a terrible thing to behold. Demon found a certain poetic justice in the flames. One had to be careful with them. Hot enough to burn, but not powerful enough to consume. Banked at just the right temperature to torment without taking the victim's ability to speak. It was a fine art, one you could only perfect through practice. Given enough work, fire could inflict horrors that would have why Boltons quaking in their boots. He had years of it, and right now he was too terribly angry. His boy, his heir, his son, nearly slain, snatched away, never to be heard from again. Why, just thinking of it threatened to send his temper pitching over the edge, which made him more than a bit aggressive at the moment. Who sent you? He extinguished a burning brand and laid it down on the table, considering the scorched man strapped to it. Answer truthfully, now, or you will die. Screaming. I don't know. His victim thrashed against the table, straining in their shackles. I swear by all the seven, by all the old gods, and the new masked man gave us a bag of coin and told us where to go, that's all. A knife slammed into his thigh. Not good enough. Perhaps we should use wildfire. He twisted the blade in their flesh, grating it against bone to draw forth a keening cry. Or would you prefer to feed Carax's wordless gibbering answered him. No, no, no. That wouldn't do. You see, you didn't just anger me. Oh no, you angered quite a few lords with your stunt. One in particular. He turned to face a shadowy corner. What say you? He doesn't seem keen on talking. Perhaps you'd care to try your luck. Otto Hightower stepped out the gloom and drew his belt knife. This is your last chance. Tell us what we need to know, or the burning continues. The man warbled. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't believe you. A fresh scream pervaded the black cells, peaking higher and higher, until it broke. Under the cover of darkness, two hooded figures met in Flea Bottom. Your men failed. The first remark proved damning. Of course they failed. The second smiled. They were meant to. Did they know that, I wonder? The silence proved most telling. One was taken prisoner. The taller of the two tutted, as we knew he would be. And if he talks, what of it? The fool never saw our faces. He knows nothing, no, less than nothing. Likewise the king remains in the dark. The first turned away with a scowl. The prince should not have been there. I warned you he might be. You were the one who chose to act. But the boy might make a suitable alternative to Demon, given the right leverage. How so? The first told the second. I see. The second sighed. Then it continues. The plan continues still. They parted in silence. Cousin, say what you would about little Lena Balerion. But she was an energetic child. Scarce had Naruto crossed the threshold into her room than she was upon him with a cry, leaping in a swirl of silk and dark skin. He caught her in his arms with a grunt, spun her around once, and set her down on her feet. It didn't stop her from fretting over him. Anxious eyes flitted across his face and arms, searching for any sign of injury. You're all right. Of course I am. He laughed, batting her hands away. Why wouldn't I be? Father told me bad men tried to kill you. They did. He granted her a grave nod. They failed. She tilted her head, reminding him of a curious dragon he'd once seen. Because you killed them first. Because I killed them first. He tousled her pale hair and flung himself into a nearby chair, opting to spare her the grisly details. Poor girl was only 12. Let her stay pure a little while longer. Where's your brother? You mean Lena? She plonked down beside him. He's in the gardens with father. He wants to send him back to Driftmark on the next tide. Little hands wrung together, clenching fretfully. Said it wasn't safe for him here. A muscle jumped in his jaw. And yet he'd leave Lena behind. That seemed cruel, even for him. Lena was his heir, the dragon rider, next to inherit Driftmark. By contrast, Lena was simply the spare. No dragon rider she, not yet, and no special talents to speak of beyond an odd propensity for dreams. She was simply a replacement should things go awry. It hurt him to see her diminished to such. Lena tugged at his sleeve. I've been dreaming again. Have you? Now he planted one elbow on the table and rested his cheek against it. What if? His little cousin smiled. The Hager. I saw her on a sandy beach far, far from here. She was sleeping there. I think she's waiting for me. The Hager, now there was a dragon he'd like to meet. She must be ancient now. Massive. Far too large for the dragon pit, but there was only one dragon for him. Balerion was out there somewhere, like an itch scratching the back of his head, growing stronger every year. They would meet again in the next decade, if not sooner. He knew it. What would transpire during said meeting ... Well, that was anyone's guess. Who could say, really? For now there were other things to worry about. Whether the queen would deliver a boy or a girl for one. She'd survived so many births before this, even if most of her children hadn't, yet the king still craved a son. ... And oh, best not to think of that for now. He turned back to Lena and flicked her forehead. She rubbed at it with a whine. What was that for? For luck. I'm sure you'll find her someday. He'd pay to see the look on Lord Corley's face when his daughter turned up with a giant dragon in tow. Speaking of dragons, he really ought to check in on. Rhaenyra was looking for you, by the way. Of course she was. Did she say what she wanted? Little Lena nodded. She said something about finding a book you were looking for on dragon sightings. His eyes lit up. Best cousin ever, love you, bye. He had her cheek and shot out the door like an arrow. He was late. Why in the seven hells was Naruto always late? Really? It wasn't fair. He was always running around doing something with someone. Must be a boy thing. Someone knocked on her door, cutting her thoughts short. Once, thrice, once again. Her eyes lit up. She knew that knock. Enter. The door swung open, revealing his smiling face. Rhaenyra flung a pillow at it. You're late. She chastised him in high Valyrian. I am never late. He caught it and laughed using the same language. I always arrive precisely when I mean to. That's your excuse. Last time you said you were helping a blind cat cross the street. Was protecting a different kind of kitten this time. She rounded on him. Who? His lips thinned. Alicent. You might want to visit her after this. Her smile faded as the argument on her lips withered and died. So it wasn't a lie then. She'd heard a few rumors whispered by the servants, but she hadn't wanted to believe them. An attack, here in Red Keep. Small wonder she hadn't seen Alicent today. Poor girl must be a nervous wreck. I shall. She granted him a nod. Good. He strode past her. Do you have it? I do. Rhaenyra tugged on his arm. This way. Sit. Naruto sighed. Such an impatient little cousin I have. Hush. She brought him to her bed, reached beneath the blankets and withdrew a heavy tome bearing a red cover. I found it hidden away in father's cupboard. An impish grin touched her lips. I've seen him writing in it more than once. Finally Naruto nearly hissed in triumph as he set it down on the bed and all but rolled it open. His bright eyes were already glued to the contents within. If he's mentioned Balerion anywhere, it's in here. This again confusion tugged at her heart. Why are you so interested in Balerion? No one has seen him in at least a decade. He's surely dead by now. Her cousin winked her way. Is he? Naruto always said that. As if he knew. His fervor for finding dragons frightened her sometimes. At others, well, best not to speak of that. Father likely wouldn't approve of such a match. Desperate to distract herself, she steered the conversation to safer waters. I understand you're competing in the joust tomorrow. Not competing, he hummed, turning another page. Winning, there's a difference. Aha, there it was, the heart of the matter. For all his claims of humility and kindness, he could be proud at times. She tilted her head to regard him and blew a strand of pale hair out her right eye. Which one? All three. Archery, the joust, and the melee. I've got a statement to make. Reality broke like a thunderclap. So that was his game. This would be his first real tournament. The first time the lords and ladies of Westeros saw what he could truly do on the field of battle. A pleasant little thrill coursed through her, warming her face. She stamped it down with a scowl. Ambitious of you ... and unlikely. There will be many seasoned knights there. For some reason that only seemed to amuse him. His shoulders shook in silent mirth. I certainly hope so. He leafed to another page. Wouldn't be any fun if they went down without a fight. Odds above he could be such a boy sometimes stay there. He listened half-heartedly, eyes still glued to the book. Rhaenyra left him to it, darted to her ribbon box and fiddled around inside it for a bit. Soon enough she found what she sought. A strip of deep black cloth, laced with threads of red. She drew it forth, shut the box and ran back to him. He paid her no mind, until she began to tie it around his wrist. It fit, just as she knew it would. Bright eyes flicked up to consider her and the little bauble she'd just given him. What's this? My favor, she preened. I expect you to wear it under your armor tomorrow. I don't have any say in the matter now, do I? You do not. All right ... and thank you. He had her forehead. I'll wear it well. Help me read this passage here. Together, they went back to reading. The tourney began with the trumpets. Viserys certainly loved his spectacles. Naruto couldn't even bring himself to blame his uncle for them. He was the dragon, likewise. He was also the crown, and it was the crown's job duty to project strength at all times. But this was ... What was the word? Excessive. Yes, that was the one. His uncle had organized 3 contests of skill in honor of his heir's soon-to birth. Archery, joust, and a test of arms. He was looking forward to the latter, not so much the former. Drums emblazoned with dragons beat out a tempo as men and women waved dragon banners from the stands above. Even the announcer of this festivities had dragons stitched into his clothes. Dragons. Everywhere he looked, dragons. Red and black, black and red, red and black. Even his own armor today was a rich, white scarlet, a contrast to his father's own black. He hated armor. It slowed him down. A little. The ridiculous dragon-winged helmet left his face open at that, which he found even more ridiculous. Well, I did ask for the challenge. His eyes swept over the arena once more. The stands were packed with noble lords and ladies whose names he couldn't be bothered to remember. The knights ... Now those were a different matter, if only because he saw a great many banners he knew by heart. Stark, Lannister, Baratheon. Great names for great houses. He also saw Bolton and of course, Hightower among them. There was another challenger tearing his way through the lists, one Criston Cole of the Stormlands. The son of a steward, if word was to be believed. Naruto, son of our beloved Prince Demon, will select his first opponent in a test of arms. Ah, that was his cue. Showtime. Bright eyes raked over the knights assembled. He could have chosen Otto's son, but that seemed in poor taste at the moment. Alyson would never forgive him if he brutalized her brother. Not the Starks either, they were a dour lot, but he didn't have anything against them. The Lannisters might be fun to smack around, but not too much. Eventually his gaze settled on Sir Criston Cole himself. He'd unhorsed both of the Baratheon lads already in the joust. Doubtless he'd give Demon trouble. ... Best to nip that in the bud early. Phew. He drew his sword and pointed at the hedge knight. He'll do. Credit where it was due, the knight bowed and hefted his weapon. A flail by the look of it. He couldn't remember the last time he'd fought against a flail. Begin. Metal hurtled in at his face. He grinned. Criston Cole was skilled. Very skilled. He wielded that flail of his like he'd been born with it. More than that, he was cautious. No arrogance, no wasted moves, no preening or posturing like some proud pea. It almost reminded him of ... Oh, was that it? He pivoted, and to his great delight, Sir Criston matched him move for move, ringing the side of his helmet like a gong. Gasps went up from the crowd as his ears rang. He grit his teeth in a laugh and lashed out, only to find himself rebuffed. Time and time again that stoic shield interposed itself between him and certain defeat. Who was he really under that helmet? He wanted to know. No, he needed to now. Faster and faster the tempo went until all he could hear was the rushing in his ears, the hammering of his own heart. How long had it been since he'd had a proper fight? Long. Too long. Far too long. He let Cole's flail curl around his blade and yanked backward, tearing it out of his grasp. Pivoting on one heel, he whirled and hurtled it well out of reach. No more of that annoying weapon. The son of the steward froze, unarmed at the last. Naruto tore his spare blade free from his belt and flung it at his feet. Pick it up. The knight hesitated. Pick it up. He all but growled the last word. Cole knelt slowly, never once taking his eyes off him. Just how much longer was he going to take? Come on, pick it up. Criston could eye him all he liked. He had no intention of ruining this moment. Not when he had finally found some semblance of a challenge. He was going to savor this moment ... and the promise it offered. At length Sir Criston stood, borrowed blade in hand. Well met. He saluted him with his sword. You are a man of honor, just as I'd heard. I'm really not. Mirroring his stance, he stepped in. Just a man. Now for the moment of truth. Their blades clashed, flashed, and sprang apart. Naruto saw his opening and swung high, knocking his helmet askew and raking a wide line across his cheek. Dark hair framed a tanned face from which startled eyes shone. Dornish. The man was Dornish ... and an utter stranger to him. It only further inflamed his confusion. He himself looked different as a Targaryen. This could be anyone. He'd known more than a few swordsmen in his day. Was he just that good? Or perhaps, the announcer boomed his approval. First to the prince. Cole closed with him. They collided in a storm of swords and all the world fell away to dull gray. Clash clang block riposte thrust parry. Sir Kristen gave as good as he got, he'd give him that. Time and time again their blades collided in a dance of death, and time and again the Dornishman surprised him with his skill. His shield was useless here. He cast it aside and braved his blade with both hands, the better to put more strength into his swings. Finally he saw his opening. Cole's sword swept and landed a heavy strike on an arm. Steel skittered off steel as the vambrace shattered. Even as it did, his eyes sparkled with triumph. Gotcha. Grinning from ear to ear, he ignored the pain that spiked down his arm and followed through to sweep his legs. Sir Kristen Cole crashed down on his back in a heap. Dazed eyes blinked up at him. What was that? That was me, Naruto growled, looming over him, knocking your arse to the dirt. When the older man drew a knife, he stamped down on his wrist, planted a boot on his and touched the sword to his throat. Now yield. Don't make me destroy you. ... Then I yield. The knight did so with a laugh. Well fought, my lord. Naruto squinted down at him. Who are you, really? A baffled blink. Just a hedge knight, my lord. Was he? He glared at Sir Kristen, searching for something. A sign of chakra, recognition in his eyes. Something, anything. He found nothing. Not a spark, not an ember, nothing at all. You couldn't hide chakra. You were born with it, just as he'd been reborn with his, or born without it. And from Sir Kristen Cole he sensed nothing, not a drop of it. No, he was normal. Completely, utterly normal. Distantly he heard the crowd cheer his name as he let Sir Kristen up. The latter grabbed his arm and held it high, pumping his fist into the air. It did him little good. A swell of bitter disappointment drowned Naruto's hopes and choked his good mood. For a moment there he'd almost hoped, nearly dared to believe someone might have followed him into this reincarnation ... But now, even now he was alone. The thought tore a bitter laugh from him. He needed a drink, something strong, maybe a whore or two to take the edge off. He left the field, tears stinging in his eyes. Always alone, always. There would be no peace while he slept. Only a few short hours later, the realm shattered. And so it finally began. The first steps, leading to the dance. Disaster struck the next morning. Naruto woke to a fierce pounding on his door, one to match the din beating in his head. Go away, he groaned into his pillow. And tired. He vaguely recalled stumbling around the Red Keep, bottle in hand, until he ran into someone. He'd slumped against them, they'd wrapped an arm around his waist and helped him back to Ho's room. Memory went fuzzy after that. An arm flailed around and failed to find anyone nearby. Mercifully, his bed was empty. Well, thank heaven for small mercies. The pounding ceased as the HHE door swung open. Crashed, really. Alicent. He blinked blearily. Her face went redder than her hair as she saw his bear. Her lips moved, almost numbly. She's dead. Who is he? Pushed himself upright. Her face went redder still. Are you drunk? Hungover? Naruto palmed his face. Don't want to talk about it. Who died? Alicent took a deep breath. Then she told him. The queen. And the world changed. Targaryen funerals were a grim affair. Naruto had been to his fair share before in the past, but never quite one like this. Two bodies lay upon the pyre before them. One large, the other small. Two lives lost in so short a time, two smiling faces he'd never see again. Dozens of people had gathered near the capital to send them off here, on a hill some miles outside the Red Keep, just shy of the sea. He found some lovely irony in that. Anima had always loved the sea. He hadn't known her all that well. He'd made an effort in the past, but now he found himself wishing he'd tried that much harder. Could he have done something? Could he have saved her? He didn't know. The uncertainty of it gnawed at him like an old dog with a bone. If he'd been awake, aware, not drunk off his arse wallowing in self-pity, would they still be alive? There was no way of knowing. In not knowing, Syrax loomed in the distance, crouched and awaiting orders. Caraxes wheeled down to join her. For once, neither dragon snapped at one another. Even they understood the solemnity of all this. The king's family had been destroyed. Nothing would be the same. No amount of firing could bring back the dead. Even now he could feel Alicent staring at his back, wanting to comfort him. No, just him. But Rhaenyra, Demon, even poor Viserys himself. Too kind, that girl. Too kind by half. He heard Demon whisper something to Rhaenyra over his shoulder. They're waiting for you. Naruto looked to his cousin. She looked even worse than he felt. Her eyes red, wet with unshed tears she refused to let fall. Stubborn little cousin. Even now at her lowest point she was a fierce dragon, wounded perhaps by loss but refusing to. Viserys, meanwhile, looked like a broken man. No, that was too kind. Hollow eyes gazed upon the pyre as though he were contemplating flinging himself upon to burn with his wife and infant son. He didn't know what had transpired in that birthing chamber to break him so. He didn't want to know, if only because he knew he wouldn't like it. I wonder, Rhaenyra spoke, softly, suddenly her voice a low, agonized rasp. During those few hours my brother lived, if my father finally found happiness. Demon nudged her. Your father needs you now more than he ever has. She looked away. I will never be a son. No, you won't. Naruto sighed over the pain noise she made, cutting her off before she could fly into a rage. You must be better than one. He reached over to squeeze her hand. And you will be. Rhaenyra latched on tight and squeezed back. She squeezed so hard he felt her nails bite into his skin. I don't want to say goodbye. Her words were a whisper. Then don't. Remember your mother for who she was, for how she lived, not how she died. She rallied a little. Tried to speak, faltered at first. Rallied when he nudged her. He looked to her. She looked to him. They looked back to the pyre. And then, together, Dracarys, Syrax and Caraxes exhaled. The bodies burned. You're leaving. I am. It's just as I said. Demon shrugged on his pack, checked Dark Sister in her sheath, and turned to face him at the last, face writ in a scowl. My dear brother has seen fit to disinherit me. I'm off to the Stepstones to win his war for him. Naruto opened his mouth to answer, closed it again when temper threatened to get the best of him. Mustn't lash out, no matter how much he wanted to. Any sign of violence would be met with more violence. He cast a baleful look at the paired Kingsguard blocking the door, effectively sealing them in. He dimly recalled their names. Sir Rick and Uruk of House Cargill. Brothers. No doubt they were here to make certain he behaved himself or see if he had any part of his father's madness last night. And what madness it was, the air for a day. What was Demon thinking, saying that? Not much, apparently. His father had come barging in here just before dawn to collect his things and bid his goodbyes. He sailed with Lord Corlys on the morning tide. I can't believe he would do this. He did. Demon stalked about the room like a man possessed, tugging on his cloak. It's already done. Because you said something foolish. I was drunk. His father pivoted on him with a wild look in his eyes. And I would not have said such a thing in his presence. No, we both knew who's responsible for this. Yes, we do. Demon squinted at him. Don't look at me like that. I had no part in this. You did. He returned his glare, refusing to falter. You should have been by Uncle's side, or even Rhaenyra's. Otto wouldn't have any ammunition to use against you if you had. Instead you were off getting yourself soused. Of course he used that against you. You gave him the perfect opportunity. Only a fool would ignore it. Demon reared back, hissing like the dragon he was at heart. And what would you have done? Hunkered down. He snapped in return. Held my tongue and comforted them until the storm passed. Which is exactly what I did. His lord father considered him for a long, agonizing moment. And where were you last night? With Rhaenyra, the words tore out of him in a roar, and he thrust both arms forward, shoving his father away. From there he stomped forward, smashing a booted foot down on his father's to hold him in place lest he lunge at him. I held her all night. She cried herself to sleep in my arms. Do you have any idea what that's like? A tan finger shot forth, digging itself into the elder Targaryen's leather cuirass. No, of course you don't. How could you? You only care about yourself. Demon flung up his arms. And now you throw his words back at me. Naruto bit his tongue to stifle his temper. I'm sorry. He didn't want them to part like this, not on such a sour note. How long will you and Caraxes be? On a bitter bark of laughter filled the air. A year, perhaps. Maybe 2. He shrugged one shoulder stiffly, his face a mask of tight anger. Perhaps once I burn Crabfeeder out of the Stepstones, the king will see fit to restore my rights. Naruto didn't think he would. Not after a slight like this. An ugly thought struck him. If you're not the heir, then who is? Rhaenyra, I expect. Demon shrugged his shoulder. Won't she be surprised? She certainly would. He almost pitied her. I'll go with you, he decided at length. A quick pivot brought him to his own desk, which he promptly began ransacking. We'll deal with the Crabfeeder together. It won't even take a year. Demon's anger died a slow death on his face, withering away into a strained smile. Nothing would please me more ... but you can't come with me. Excuse me. His father looked past him, to the still silent Kingsguard brothers. You are to stay here. By order of the king. Realization broke like the dawn, burning all uncertainty away. As a hostage to ensure your compliance. Demon didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Naruto made a choked noise. He could put an end to this madness, he knew. He absolutely could slaughter every guard in this room without breaking a sweat. It would be like carving a cake. Fight his way to Uncle Viserys. Make him change his mind. Kill him, if need be. He could butcher anyone and everyone who dared oppose him. It would be easy. So terribly easy. No one knew what he was truly capable of. No one could stop him. And then what? Reality sank in, seeped into his thoughts like the darkest of poisons. If he shed here, he could never take it back. Alicent, Lena, Rhaenyra. Unbidden, his mind conjured up their faces among his thoughts. Their heartbroken expressions. The tears in their eyes. They'd think him a monster. They wouldn't understand. No one would. He'd be the butcher who put his father on the throne by force, a madman who catapulted the realm into war. One that wouldn't end until he or everyone who opposed him was dead. It was a war he would win. A war that would cost countless lives, but one he would see the other side of. Many would not. He blew out an angry breath. I will stay. I know you will. Demon clapped his shoulder and drew him into a crushing embrace. He found himself returning it stiffly. This wasn't what he wanted. None of it was. You must harden your heart in the days to come. His father whispered in his ear. Don't let those leeches sink their teeth into you. I'll be back soon enough. His piece said. He let him go and stood, stared at him for a long moment and marched to the door. He swung it open and didn't look back. Not once, not even when Sir Eric peeled off to follow him. Naruto glared at the door, watched it close behind him. He must be calm. Had to be calm. His right hand clenched into a fist. Blue eyes sparked red. He wasn't calm. Not at all. A snarl tore out of him as his fist crashed through the door frame, spraying splinters in every direction. Once, twice, thrice now, until a fourth blow smashed it clean off its hinges and into the wall. Unsatisfied, he stalked after battered wood and tore it apart, beating it down until it was so much sawdust at his feet. It did precious little to assuage his temper. Damn it all. Damn him, he hadn't asked for this for any of it. Someone coughed behind him. Only then did he realize Sir Rick hadn't yet left. Now what, he glared wide red daggers at him. Why are you still here? To his credit, Rick at least managed to look somewhat contrite. I am sorry, my lord, but the king wishes to see you. Naruto found his uncle stood before an altar of burning candles. Limned by decades worth of wax, it stood as a testament to the age, as a reminder of a kingdom that spanned the decades. Stern and strong, only growing longer and harder, made ever more powerful by the passage of time. Some might call it a portent, an example and warning in equal measure. The House of the Dragon stood strong and proud even now, more than a century after Egon's death. He disagreed. For him the wax represented not royalty but wrought an awful corruption that had slowly crept into the Targaryen dynasty until it became a blight, a wound that must be excised. And there atop the altar stood a giant dragon's skull. Larger than large, a giant among giants. Fake. He'd seen dragon bones before, and these were not those. It was good craftsmanship, but he knew the real from the fake. Kurama would have laughed at it. As it were, a small, despondent smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You wanted to see me, uncle? Viserys was silent for a long, ponderous moment, running an open palm over the candles. Balerion was the last living creature to have seen old Valera before the doom. Here at last he looked upon the skull, all its greatness and all of its flaws. A moment of silence passed between the two of them. What I am about to tell you is a secret. It does not leave this room. He turned to face him, and Naruto found himself wincing at just how haggard the poor man looked. Do you understand? He muttered his assent. This skull, a rusty chuckle pervaded the crypts as he looked back to him, is not real. Shortly before his death, King Ares ordered this made by the finest craftsmen the world over, then had them killed to protect the secret. It suits the world well to think that such a monster is dead, to believe that a creature like this no longer exists. Naruto found himself tilting his head. Had to play along, here. Yet he does. Viserys confirmed. He isn't dead, then. No, Viserys shook his head in agreement. No, he is not. The Black Dread lives. My bond with him used to be so strong. He touched a candle and looked at the false skull with a rueful chuckle. It has faded in recent years. As has he, I expect, but he still persists. Would you believe he was last seen in Dorne only a week ago near Sunspear? His heart sang. The journal he'd borrowed hadn't mentioned that bit. It is my belief that he is searching for something. Viserys. Something. Not someone. His uncle didn't know. The realization shocked Naruto. It felt wrong to steal another man's dragon out from under him. But as Viserys' bond with Balerion had waned, so had his continued to wax and grow ever stronger. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could feel the old worm as he'd once felt Kurama, like some silent expectation gnawing at the back of his brain, as if he were waiting for some signal that he didn't know how to give. Was there some connection left there? But Viserys was looking to him, speaking once more. When you look at me, what do you see? Weakness, kindness, exhaustion, sadness and sorrow. Naruto said the latter. Fair. His uncle sighed. The dragons, then when you look at them, what are your thoughts? Pardon here at last, his temper slipped its leash. You've scarcely said a word to me since Aunt Emma's funeral. You banished my father to fight in the stepstones for something he said while drunk. Kept me captive in the Red Keep as a hostage against him. And now you have your why-blasted Kingsguard drag me down here to talk about dragons. A hostage. Viserys all but swelled with anger. Do you think so little of me? Boy, you are my. But why of old Valera you are no hostage, despite what your foolish father may have you think. Careful. Naruto stood his ground, idly fingering the dagger hidden up his sleeve. You may be my uncle, but I won't stand by and let you insult Demon. Please. His uncle pleaded with him, voice softening. It's important. When you think of the dragons, what do you see? He looked back to the skull, considering. Fire and... Viserys quirked a pale brow and waved him on. Rhaenyra once told me something. Everyone says Targaryens are closer to gods than men. He waved a hand at the false skull mounted atop the altar. But they only say that because of our dragons. Without them, we're just like everyone else ... or so she'd think. He lifted his chin a little to stare the older man in the eye. But we are our dragons, just as our dragons are us. We bleed. We grow old. We die. But we do not go quietly. His answer seemed to mollify Viserys, for he nodded. The idea that we control the dragons is an illusion. He paced away from him, hands clasped behind his back. They are a power man never should have trifled with. One that brought Valyria its doom. If we don't mind our own histories, it will do the same to us. Without warning, he spun back to face him. Any true Targaryen must understand this ... to be king. In a flash, Naruto's world shattered again. I'm sorry to lay this burden upon you, nephew. His uncle stepped closer still as his mind scrambled to catch up. I have wasted these last years wanting for a son. Rhaenyra and Aemma have suffered for it, as has the realm. But you ... you are the very best of your father ... and your mother, though you knew her not. He flinched a little at the remark. You have proven yourself to be kind, caring, stern when need be, yet unafraid of battle. You are a just man, and I believe that, in time, you could be a great ruling king. Naruto recoiled. He didn't want a demon's your heir, not me. His uncle wouldn't be swayed. Your father was not made to wear the crown. But I believe that you are. No. This wasn't something he'd planned for. Not this. Never, ever this. He could see where it was going, the disaster that would follow. This would start a war. Lords and ladies the world over would tear one another apart to win his affections. If you want an heir named Rhaenyra. He shook his head. I don't want it. You must. His uncle seized him by the shoulders, shocking him with the intensity of his gaze. I love my daughter, but she is all that remains of her mother. If I name her heir ... the realm will destroy her. Bit by bit, piece by painful piece. I see that now. As much as I dislike it, men would sooner set everything to the torch than allow a woman to seat the Iron Throne. His temper sparked as he shook him off with a snarl. That's no reason not to try. She should be next in line. Viserys despair and looked to him. Do you believe she would make a good queen? Naruto opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again now. ... and closed it once more. Would she make a good queen? In all honesty, he didn't know. She held the right by to be sure. But what had she been taught? Not much. Not enough. He, on the other hand, in his first life he'd ruled over an entire village, maintained peace and prosperity for his people, walking the razor's edge between chaos and order. In his second he'd studied his histories, pondered over the mistakes of kings and rulers past, and become convinced that the Targaryens as a whole were beginning to go mad. He would not. Indeed, he was uniquely positioned to prevent such a thing. Rhaenyra was not. As far as he knew, his cousin didn't even want to inherit. She wanted ... well. He knew her wants very well. She'd told him them. She wanted to fly with a Lyson on Dragonback, see the great wonders across the narrow sea and eat only cake. She wasn't worried about her position. She'd never once, in her life, mentioned wanting to be queen. If he passed this over, the burden would surely fall to her. And then where would they be? The realm forced to swear their oaths to a mourning girl, a girl who would slowly be crushed beneath the weight of their expectations. He didn't want that for her. By the log, he didn't want that fate for anyone. If he could spare her that pain. There it is, that keen mind of yours. Viserys spoke softly, earning a dark glower from him. You know full well the weight the crown holds. This is no trivial gesture, nephew. Dragonstone is one thing, but the Iron Throne is the most dangerous seat in the realm. Should you take it, you will have to marry. Take a wife, father children, secure your succession properly, as I could not. He looked away with a scowl. I'm well aware of that. You must be. Something in his uncle's voice had him looking back to him. For a moment in the candlelight, he looked weathered, aged beyond his years. I will not marry again. I cannot. He shook his head, and for a fleeting instant, he glimpsed tears in the eyes of his uncle. I dare not, for fear of what it might do to me. He'd thought as much. By all telling, his aunt and uncle had loved one another dearly. They'd spent most of their lives together. He would never again love another as he had her. Furthermore, marrying again so soon after declaring a new heir would only muddy the waters of succession. Time would tell if Viserys kept to his word. He hoped so, but many a man had made such promises in the past. Silence reigned between them. Viserys broke it first. Will you take up this mantle? Could he be a good king? He believed so, yes. He had the mind for it, if not the stomach. But becoming the heir, one day ruling over 7 kingdoms ... did he dare? A true king was more than a Hawkeye could ever be. He knew Demon Dad might not take kindly to his decision. Or might he be proud? There was truly no way of telling with him sometimes. He tried to think of all the good he could do. And children, little ones running around underfoot. He might enjoy being a father again. He'd loused it up last time and learned his lesson. No, he wouldn't make that mistake again. Any child of his, son or daughter, he'd be there for. Completely. I can choose my own wife. His uncle nodded. Whomever you wish. Then ... yes. The word tasted like ash on his tongue. I'll do it. Good. Viserys almost seemed to sag before his eyes. Now there is something else I need tell you. Naruto blew out an angry breath. Of course there was. What else could he possibly say that was worse than this? It might be difficult for you to understand, but you must hear it. Our histories. As he looked on, his uncle paced away from the fire looking past the false skull anew. They tell us that Aegon looked across the Blackwater from Dragonstone and saw a rich land ripe for the capture. But ambition alone is not what drove him to conquest. It was a dream. Dreams. Helena had dreams. Dreams of dragons. And just as Daenerys foresaw the end of Valyria, Viserys rambled on. Aegon foresaw the end of the world of men. 'Tis to begin with a terrible winter gusting out of the distant north. Aegon saw absolute darkness riding on those winds, and whatever dwells within will destroy the land of the living. When this great winter comes, nephew, all of Westeros must stand against it. A shiver stole up his spine. And if the world of men is to survive, Viserys continued to pace, heedless of the sudden dread he felt. A Targaryen must be seated on the Iron Throne, a king or queen strong enough to unite the realm against the cold and the dark. Aegon called his dream the Song of Ice and Fire. There was something about those words that resonated within him. Where had he heard those words before? This secret has been passed from king to heir since Egon's time. His uncle laid a hand on his shoulder, rooting him where he stood. And now you must promise to carry it and protect it, always. His grip tightened a bit, fingers digging desperately into his skin. Promise me this, Naruto. You must promise me. He heaved a sigh. I promise. There. It was done. His word was his bond. There could be no turning back. Not now. Not ever. At long last. For the first time in decades. He sensed him. He knew where he was. At long last he had purpose again. A mission. A goal. Here and now, Balerion spread his great wings and took flight. Alicent found him in the gardens. In hindsight, Naruto wasn't all that hard to find. One had but to look for the silver armor of the King's Guard to know he was near. Sir Rick. Sir Uruk. She sketched a quick curtsy to the brothers. Is the prince within? The elder of the two nodded. He is, my lady. May I see him? They duo exchanged a wry look. Here to wish him luck, the former wore a bemused smile that put paid to her expectations. Uri tutted. Hush now, brother. Don't tease the poor girl. They parted for her. Alicent scurried between them. Naruto was seldom the subtle sort. His hair was a dead giveaway among all the greens and golds, to say nothing of his attire. He was sat upon a stone bench, hands on his knees, a flagon of wine beside him. The servants had dressed him well. He looked regal in black and red, every bit a prince, the future king he was meant to be. It wasn't fair. He was good and kind and charming and above all merciful, a stark contrast to most lords, and Oguchi did not deserve this burden. Why had Demon done what he did she didn't know. Father had been exultant. He'd long held a grudge against the rogue prince. To have him brought low in such a manner must have brought him no small amount of pleasure. In a single fell swoop, he'd removed a thorn in his side and found someone far more palatable in his place. Will you go to him? He'd asked of her. He needs guidance in this moment, now, more than ever. He needn't have. She would have happily sought him out anyway. I thought you might be here. She sat beside him. He didn't look at her. His eyes were on the coast, as though he were watching, waiting for something. How'd you find me? Alicent quirked a brow. Fair enough. He sighed. How are you feeling? She gripped a trembling hand to still a tremor ... and hide the nail she'd bitten. I had another nightmare last night. For some peculiar reason, that made Naruto wince. I'm sorry. Don't be. She shook her head. You defended me. If not for you, I'd be on a boat to Essos right now. Her heart quailed just thinking about it. She would not have lived long across the narrow sea. No, not long at all. Naruto knocked back his goblet, drained it to the last drop, and crushed it in his hand. I won't let that happen to you again. It sounded suspiciously like a promise. Alicent eyed the sundered cup and imagined it as the head of the one responsible for that horrid plot. It brought her some small relief. She was no fighter, she never had been, but perhaps it was time she started to learn. She never wanted to feel that helpless. Not ever again. And speaking of helpless, they're waiting for you, she whispered. I know. Naruto ran a hand through his hair. He looked tired, exhausted, really. I'll be along in a bit. Alicent scooted a little closer. No, it can't be easy. She laid her hand on his. Losing your aunt and your father, almost in the same day, then having this burden thrust upon you. I did it to spare Rhaenyra. He heaved a sigh. But now I almost wonder if that's an excuse. If I actually want it. Oh, gods, Rhaenyra. Someone would need to speak with her soon. Alicent didn't know if her dear friend wanted to be queen, but Viserys had slighted her all the same, just as Rhaenys had been slighted so long ago. He could always yield the throne when he became king if he didn't want it, surely. He didn't have to keep it. Her eyes met his. Want it, I mean. He held her gaze and curled a finger around hers, sending a little jolt through her body. I want to do good. And what about you? What do you want? Alicent's throat went dry. What I want. She wanted him. Wanted him as she'd never wanted another in all her life. She wanted him to reach across the table, take her by the waist, pull her into his lap, and press his lips to hers, to feel her hands on his, her body tangled up in his, for the two of them to finish what had nearly begun in the Tower of the Hand before those ruffians interrupted. The realization wasn't quite as jarring as she'd thought it would be, and her mind began to wander to dark, treacherous places. Alicent. Oh gods, she'd been ignoring him again. She squirmed a little in her seat and swallowed, face flushing. Naruto must have seen it too, because his eyes flashed. There was a spark of something there. Alicent wanted to act on it, so very badly. Painfully, she restrained herself. No, not yet, not just yet. In this moment, she settled for holding his hand, standing now, tugging him up after her. Shall we be off, then? Her prince smiled. One by one, the lords of Westeros swore their fealty before the Iron Throne. Lena's father knelt first. I, Corlys of House Balerion, Lord of the Tides, and Master of Driftmark, promise to be faithful to King Viserys and his named heir, the Prince Naruto. I pledge fealty and shall defend them against all enemies in good faith, without deceit. I swear this, by all the old gods and the new. Away went Lord Corlys, and then came another to kneel. He recognized one. Otto's brother. I, Hobart Hightower, Beacon of the South, Defender of the Citadel, and Voice of Old Town, promise to be faithful to King Viserys and his named heir, the Prince Naruto. I pledge fealty to them and promise to defend them against all enemies in good faith, and without deceit. I swear this by all the old gods and the new. So many lords, one after the other. They swore and swore and swore. And he had to stand here, dressed up in all this finery, listening to them. I, Jason Lannister. I, Ormond Baratheon. I, Rickon Stark, Lord of Winterfell. He wasn't sure how much time passed after that before the long line before him finally dwindled to a single soul, and then none at all. At last, it was done. Viserys rose from his throne and all, himself included, turned to face him. I, Viserys Targaryen, first of his name, he stood, brandishing Blackfire before him, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, do hereby name my nephew, Naruto Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone, and heir to the Iron Throne. Naruto inclined his head. In his peripherals, he glimpsed others doing the same. So, that's it, just like that. He felt an invisible weight settle about his shoulders as he looked into the crowd. Alicent smiled at him. Little Lena actually dared to wave. Rhaenyra just stood there. She did not scowl, nor did she smile. She simply stared, face carved from blank stone, impossible to read. He wondered if she understood why he'd done this. Was she happy for him, angry, he couldn't tell. Nevertheless, he'd done this for her sake. All to save her from the Iron Throne. Naruto had never seen such an uglier chair in all his life. Ugly perhaps, but powerful all the same. The greatest seat in all the realm, the throne of the king, highest of all, bringing 7 kingdoms to heel. Pity his uncle was so weak. King Viserys was a good man to be sure. The realm had never seen better since the reign of Jaehaerys himself, but he lacked the strength of his predecessor. And now he'd named him a new heir for all the lords and ladies to see. He'd find himself swamped with marriage proposals in a week. He pursed his lips to stifle a sigh. How could anyone want this? And why do I? Viserys tapped Blackfire against the steps. My heir will now address you all. Uncle, say what now? Naruto bit his lip to stifle the shout that threatened to burst forth from his throat. Oh gods, the speech. No one said anything about a why-blasted speech. What was he supposed to say? What could he say? He hadn't even thought of anything. Even now he could feel their eyes on him, watching, waiting for the first sign of weakness. To hold his tongue here promised disaster. But in the same vein, speaking foolishly would doom him all the same. He had to play the part here, no matter how much he might loathe it. Alicent gave him an encouraging look beside her father. He heaved a sigh. Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained, as they say. He opened his mouth to speak. Lords and ladies of Westeros, before we begin, there's something I'd like you all to hear. A dragon's roar rattled the Red Keep from top to bottom, swallowing his words whole. Men and women screamed, doubled over and clutched at their ears. Naruto's face lit up in a flash of vicious, triumphant recognition. He couldn't have timed that better if he tried. Could it be? Demon saw the winged shadow first. He'd been on the verge of departing for the Stepstones with Mysaria only a moment before when he first glimpsed it from the sky, heard it. The heavy beat of wings beating out their dark cadence, a deadly dirge, a steady wump-wump-wump that left shockwaves in its wake. His lover yelped and clung tight to him, but he paid her little heed. From the back of Caraxes he glimpsed ebony black scales cutting through the clouds, a creature so large that even Caraxes whimpered in fear. It was all he could do to keep his dragon from fleeing on the spot. No creature had ever inspired such terror in him or the worm. Such awe, such wonder, and yet for all that, the monstrosity paid them no heed. It didn't notice them on Caraxes, or if it did, it certainly didn't seem to care. Instead it belched a great gout of crimson fire, such heat, and dove right past them. As it did, Demon glimpsed the scars on its back, smelled the faint scent of fire and brimstone, heard the roar that rattled the world, a deep bass rumble that rattled his teeth and left his ears ringing. Whatever it was, it moved with frightful speed for something so large, and it was headed toward the capital. Mysaria whispered against his back. What is that? This could only be one beast, one creature, one dragon, one worm that surpassed all others. Had his son called it, he wondered, had it come for him at last, or perhaps. A wry smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The future. The winged shadow blotted out the sun, draping itself over King's Landing. Peasants wailed. Lords and ladies cowered in fear. Knights soiled their trousers. Balerion paid them no heed. Why should he? They were as ants to him. His hunger could wait. He was close now. So very close. He could smell him. He had his scent now, even over the stink of this city. Where? There a figure had emerged from the Red Keep ahead of the others. A young man. He strode with poise and purpose, taking the steps 2 at a time in his haste to descend. When he looked up and saw him, how could he not? The ancient worm heard a distant peal of laughter sweet as birdsong and felt his joy. He burned like the sun in his mind's eye, bright as he had been on that fateful day ages past. But what was this? The man was making for a space near the high walls, with others racing after him. A rather wide open space. Aha, the bright man wished to see him. Did he face to face, as they had in their first meeting? Very well. With a triumphant roar, Balerion swooped down to greet him. Dragon. Naruto never knew who shouted it, only that someone did. Soon enough the cry was on everyone's lips, ripping through the capital like a bout of summer fever. Frankly, he didn't give a damn. Let the lords and ladies shout and wail. They could soil their drawers for all he cared. He only had eyes for the massive shadow winging its way toward the walls of the Red Keep. And what a shadow it was. Balerion was even larger than he remembered, and thrice as loud. His very roar rattled the world enough to make a man deaf if he wasn't careful. How did a dragon get that big and stay alive? How were his organs even functioning at such a size? Vhagar herself was likely half his length, and that was being generous. The Black Dread must have noticed him at some point, because he swooped down to greet him. Swooping was usually bad for the swoopy, less so the swooper, but today he found it a good thing, a very good thing indeed. Heh, by the log he was getting too giddy for his own good. But he just couldn't help it. This was like meeting a long-lost friend after a great journey. There could be nothing better. Balerion swooped lower still to meet him, circling the walls. This close, he couldn't help but marvel at him. He was the same size as Kurama, maybe a little larger. His scales were like tenfold shields, his teeth were swords, his claws spears, and the shock of his tail a thunderbolt that left every lord and lady flinching. His very wings threatened to stir up a hurricane, and his breath. Right on cue the Lord of Dragons threw his head back and screamed a pillar of fire unto the heavens. Death, here I am, he seemed to say. Where are you? And so he raised his right arms high to greet his old friend. Here I'm right here. Remarkably, Balerion heard him. He'd never seen a dragon turn in the air so fast. One last circle brought him low to the walls. His claws swept out as he came in for a landing. Alicent yelped and ducked behind him. The dragon paid her no mind. He only had eyes for him. Naruto kept waving, smiling, grinning like he never had before. That's right down here. Balerion didn't so much strike the wall as he collided with it. His massive talons flexed and gripped stone, a good bit of which crumbled beneath him. The very act of his descent created a shockwave felt through the whole of King's Landing. He himself had to reach back and around himself to catch Alicent lest she fall. A few unlucky nobles fell to their deaths then and there as their footing fell away. More fools they. He imagined the folk of Flea Bottom looking up to see the Black Dread and smiled a little. This would be a sight everyone carried with them to their dying day. And then his old friend was upon him and he had no further thought for such things. Mighty jaws parted in a world-shattering roar, blasting his hair backward. Naruto stood strong in the face of it, knowing it for a test. He only smiled. Sure enough, the scream fell silent. The Black Dread furled his wings and surged forward, all but thrusting his massive face at him. Naruto caught his snout with both hands and hugged it, pressing his forehead against dark scales to brace himself. He laughed and idly ran a hand beneath the beast's jaw, scratching his chin as one might a large cat. A pleased trill came from his dear friend. It's been a long while, he sighed. How have you been? A massive tongue flitted out and licked him from head to toe. I missed you, too. Naruto laughed despite the drool. Good to see you. Balerion nudged him again. Anyone else would have been knocked clear off their feet. I have come at the promised time to fulfill my debt. For a moment, he could have sworn he heard a deep voice inside his head. Command me, I shall burn your enemies. Was he hearing things? Dragons didn't talk. Caraxes didn't, and Syrax certainly hadn't. Even old Vermithor hadn't spoken to him. Command me, okay, he definitely wasn't imagining that. How in the hell? You gave me your life. Force the day. We are one. Command me. Neat. It felt surprisingly nice to have a voice in his head again, strange as that might sound. He'd grown lonely in Kurama's absence. Balerion was no true replacement for him, but it made him feel a little less alone in the world. He could hardly tell anyone he was talking to a dragon. They'd think him mad, yet it was nice to have someone in his corner again. It matters not. Come, we will fly now. Wait a second. Alicent still quavered behind them, staring at the ground. Now that just wouldn't do. Naruto turned halfway towards her and held out one palm. Give me your hand. Slowly now. She dithered, gaze flicking between him and Balerion. Back to him now. I don't think that's wise. You trust me, don't you? A gulp. Yes. Slowly, tentatively, she put trembling fingers in his. Yet her knuckles reveled in her blush, then guided her hand to the right side of Balerion's face. He held it there. A giant eye there swiveled down to regard her. Dilated a little now as he looked on. The dread inhaled deeply, tasting her scent, coming to know her as he did him. A low noise rumbled from the beast's throat. Nervous laughter tumbled from his lady's lips, high and anxious, but she did not pull away. He wondered what the ancient worm might be thinking in this moment. Curious. The dragon's laugh. Why did it sound like Balerion was laughing? Why had his rider brought this female before him? Balerion scowled and inhaled deeply, tasting her scent, trying to comprehend. He understood now. This must be the man's mate. Doubtless she was first, even if he saw no sign of any second. She carried his scent on her and stuck close to him as any true partner would. More than that, she showed proper deference and respect. This one was wise to fear him. He hated the arrogant ones. Just as there could be no life without death, so too there could be no strength without fear, no power without weakness. She had all three of things. Very well, he nuzzled her and rumbled his approval, both for her and any future hatchlings she might produce. And then he heard a new voice. Gods be good. Visories approached. He did so slowly with tentative steps, blackfire in hand, not trusting the weak ground underfoot, neither wishing to ruin the moment nor provoke the behemoth before him. He had known Balerion wasn't yet dead, of course he knew. However weak their bond might have become over the years, he would have felt it if the Black Dread died. A small part of him hoped he would have stayed away. His presence had thrown all of King's Landing into disarray. The small folk had not feared dragons overmuch before they would now with his return. When he'd last seen Balerion, he had been old and tired, near death. Now, he'd never looked more alive. Larger, too. For him to arrive mere moments after his nephew's ascension there could be no doubt. This was a sign from the gods, surely. The lords and ladies of Westeros would doubtless take it as such. They might even think this was planned. It wasn't, but the beginning of his nephew's speech certainly made it seem as such. Rumors would fly thick and fast after today. They'd have to make a space for Balerion if he was to stay in King's Landing again, not to mention find sufficient food to feed such a monstrosity. The logistics of such an endeavor threatened to make his head spin. The Dragon Keepers would be absolutely beside themselves with worry. Gods forbid any eggs that might follow. But that was neither here nor there. He had a dragon to greet, perhaps even claim again if Balerion allowed it. Gods be good. He raised his voice at the last to make his presence known. The last thing he wanted was to spook this magnificent creature. Why have you come here? It's been so long. Naruto turned, blanching. Uncle, I wouldn't. Too little, too late. Balerion caught his scent and reared back with frightful speed, far faster than a creature his size had any right to be. In a heartbeat, Viserys found himself face to face with the dread himself. He watched that scaled snout peel back, massive fangs flashing like swords in the sunlight. Something deep inside him quailed at the sight. A single bite could snap him clean in half. And still Balerion snarled at him, a deep rumbling sound that seemed to go on forever, building higher and higher, until he roared. The very air around him burst, blasting his hair and robes back. Such strength balked and slammed Blackfire down against the ground edge first to steady himself. It was not enough. His nephew had somehow stood his ground without flinching. Viserys was not nearly so brave. He stumbled back under the sheer force of the dread scream and fell to a knee, clinging to his sword for dear life. A voice echoed in his mind like a great gong, an almighty thunderclap. Unworthy. Had he imagined that word just now? Surely he must have. He did not, however, imagine Balerion turning away. Dragons could not speak, surely not, but the dismissal was all too clear. He'd seen this happen twice before in the past to others. Dragons chose their riders when they became dissatisfied with those they selected. They often picked another. Sometimes the old rider was lucky enough to escape unscathed. Others were not. He watched a man try to reclaim a dragon that rejected him once. Never again. Viserys had no doubt his former mount could have killed him in that moment. Yet he was spared. The message was anything but subtle. Out with the old, in with the new. He'd never thought such a thing would happen to him. Not here. Not like this. Worse, all of King's Landing had likely seen that spectacle. Those who hadn't would know soon enough. He didn't want to imagine what insults they might whisper behind his back now. The unworthy, they could call him. He who was rejected by Balerion himself, in full view of the Red Keep. I yield. The words pained him, physically took a piece from his very soul as he climbed back to his feet. I yield Balerion to you, nephew. Just as he would one day yield Blackfire to him upon his death. Naruto winced. I'm sorry. Don't be. He forced himself to smile, when in truth he wanted to weep. Dragons choose their riders. Balerion has chosen you, today, of all days. This is a good omen. Alicent dithered behind his nephew and he granted her a small chuckle. I'm sure this has been quite the memorable day for you both. Otto's daughter sketched a curtsy. Odd. Balerion seemed downright docile in her presence. It has, your grace. Your grace. The thought drew a bitter sigh from Viserys. For how much longer he wouldn't be surprised if the realm grew restless after this. It mattered not. His heir, his succession was now secure. Of that much he had no doubt. Only a fool would dare stand against him now. Any who tried would suffer for it. T would be the field of fire all over again. But there would be worse trials ahead. Who would he marry? He wondered. He could see how close Alicent was with him. Otto would be overjoyed. In a single, his line could be seated on the Iron Throne. Would Lord Corlys try to shove little Lena at him? She was so young. And then there was Rhaenyra. Gods above, he'd need to speak with his daughter after this. If she hadn't been angry before, she would be seething now. Their family's greatest dragon had just been wrested out from under him. He would have to make her see that. If he failed to do so, no, he must not fail here. It felt as if the entire realm balanced upon a knife's edge. To teeter one way or another would surely send the all plummeting into the fires of war. Balerion stirred behind them and laid his head down beside Naruto. A giant eye fixed upon him. The gesture was clear. Go on. Viserys shooed Naruto toward him. He's waiting for you. Well, no time like the present. As he looked on, his nephew approached Balerion. The Black Dread remained still as he scaled his scales to reach the crest of his neck. The lad had plenty of dragon riding experience with Caraxes. He was no stranger to the art of flight. This was hardly any different for him. Just larger. In no time at all he sat upon his back. But they didn't take flight. He looked to Alicent. She looked back. He kept staring at her. Well, he grinned down at her. Care to join me? She winced. I really shouldn't. You really should. Alicent looked to him for guidance. Viserys granted her a nod. Go on. He's waiting. Something solidified in her face and she made to approach the Black Dread. Slowly at first, then with increasing boldness when the dark dragon made no move against her. She clambered up Balerion's neck, using his scales for handholds awkwardly, faltering a few times until Naruto caught her hand halfway and slung her up after him. She latched onto his back for dear life, clinging to his waist, burying her head against his shoulder for some semblance of comfort. Viserys didn't miss the way her chin came down over his shoulder, nor the way he whispered to her in the flush that followed. Oh yes, Otto would be elated. His nephew barked a command in high Valyrian. Balerion came alive again in an instant, raising his massive bulk off the wall. Mighty wings beat once, twice, thrice, and away they went, soaring over the capital. Viserys watched them go. Be good to him. He whispered softly, the words lost under his breath. He will need you in the days to come. Gods above, he was so tired. Shaking his head, the weary monarch limped back to the Red Keep. There were plans to be made and a feast to prepare. Alicent clung on for dear life as the world fell away below her. How did anyone do this? She felt sick to her stomach. Each beat of Balerion's wings rattled her teeth. It was all she could do, hold on to Naruto as the world hurtled by them. Even now wicked momentum pressed down against her, threatening to tear off Balerion's back if her grip slackened even for an instant. This is madness. Her cry was lost to the winds. Naruto only laughed. Almost there, now. Almost where? He barked a command in Valerian, one she barely understood, even with her lessons. Higher they went now. Higher still. They hit a cloud bank soon thereafter and fear got the better of Alicent again. She squeezed her eyes shut against the misty haze that followed. Was he flying her into a storm? Had he lost his mind? Oh, she knew this was a bad idea. What was she thinking? Riding on dragonback madness and misery, the lot of it. This was terrifying. All too soon she felt the sun upon her face again. Momentum fell away, leaving her feeling oddly weightless. Even then she didn't dare peek. We're here. Naruto's voice tugged her out of her misery. Take a look. Alicent reluctantly dared to open her eyes. She immediately wished she'd done so sooner, for the sight before her stole her very breath away. An endless blue expanse sprawled before her and beneath Balerion's back. And between the beats of his wings she glimpsed a misty white haze below. Clouds, she realized. Those were clouds. They were above the clouds themselves. The sun blazed above, gentle and warm. It was just the three of them, lost in their own little world. A tear ran down her eye. She couldn't find the words. Beautiful, isn't it? Naruto's words tugged her back to reality. It's nice and quiet up here. You're the only person I've ever shown this to. It really is. This was too much. Just far too much for her to bear. Alicent couldn't control herself any longer. Not up here. She touched one hand to Naruto's cheek, gently steering his face around to meet hers. He resisted a little at first, not quite comprehending what she intended. He caught on quickly. A hand came up to cup her cheek in turn, idly stroking her face. Her eyes met his. His own flicked down to her mouth. She leaned in and she pressed her lips to his. Softly at first, then with hunger when he didn't respond. He stiffened for all of an instant, then his hands were on her waist, drawing her close, pulling her off Balerion's back and into his lap, eyeing her fiercely with years of repressed passion. Not enough. Not close enough. She needed more than this. Alicent flung her arms around his neck and held tight, welding her body to his and clinging to him for dear life, trusting in him to hold her, to protect her up here and keep her safe. No one could see them up here. None could know. Alicent reveled in the freedom of it all. Here in this moment, the world consisted only of the two of them. No words were said. None were needed. Her heart soared higher than any dragon ever could. She never wanted to come down. Never ever. Ada watched Balerion soar down out of the clouds. And in that moment he knew. Somehow, he just knew. A wry smile touched his bearded face. Well done, daughter. Little Lena watched them fly. Someday she would have a dragon of her own. She swore she would. Swore by the old gods and the new. The space was soon cleared for Balerion near the dragon pit. He would never live in it, of course. He was much too large. He would have to dwell without. Just as well, too, his presence riled the other dragons. Had he dwelt there with them, there might have been some complications, casualties, lots of them. Remarkably, the Dreadlord surprised them all. He settled down quite peacefully. Now he waited for his sister. Rhaenyra corned him during the feast. Naruto knew an argument was brewing the moment he laid eyes on his cousin. One look at her eyes was all it took to see the storm within. He was suddenly inordinately grateful Alicent had slipped off somewhere with her father, if only because it spared her having to see this. To his credit, he tried to avoid her at first. He wanted to speak with her afterward, not here where they might be overheard. No such luck. She caught him at a window and grabbed his arm. He felt her fingernails bite into his wrist. You must be terribly proud of yourself. And here we go. He took a long drink from the goblet in his hand, draining the wine within down to the last drop. Only then did he turn to face her. Where's this coming from? Don't play coy with me. She lifted her chin to glare at him. You took my father's dragon. He tore his arm from her grasp. Did I? You did. She had slapped his, drawing a sigh from him. She was angry, downright livid, and hers was a fiery rage. Always had been. Your father only ever rode him once. He countered calmly, refusing to rise to the bait. A long time ago, as a prince, not a king, before you or I were even born. That doesn't change. You saw what happened. No, he wouldn't give her a chance to rally. He came here and went for me. What was I to do? Say no? I'd like to live, thank you very much. So he did. She crossed both arms before her. Why? He couldn't give that answer to her, not without giving himself away. She wouldn't believe him anyway. Not going to answer? Fine. She growled at him. Father chose you as his heir. What did you say to convince him? Anger reared its ugly head. Convince? You think I asked for this? He rounded on her, incredulous. I didn't ask for this. For any of it. No, she cooed with a saccharine smile. It must be such a burden to be heir. That is. What do you know? She stood on the very tips of her toes to drive a finger into his and glare at him, fighting for every inch to make herself seem taller. You're a boy. Everything you ever had was gifted to you on a silver platter. You don't mean that. He planted a hand on her shoulder to push her back down. You just lost your mother. You're in mourning, so I'll let that slide. It doesn't change what you did. We do not control the dragons, Rhaenyra. Come. She was lashing out blindly. He wouldn't do the same. They choose us. They tolerate us. Allow us to ride them. We are not their masters. They are our friends. She whirled away. You sound like my father. Then I'm speaking sense. He countered. I took this role to spare you. Spare me. It was the wrong thing to say, and he realized it too late because she bridled and bared her teeth at him like the dragon she was at heart. From what? From the realm. His temper slipped its leash for a moment before he wrestled it back under control. This is the most dangerous seat in all the world. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, heavy indeed. It is not a prize, no matter what you might think. And what do you think of me? He blinked. Where had that come from? I think you're overreacting. Alicent, then. She rallied with a dangerous gleam in her eye. Tell me what you think of her. Her lips on his as they rode Balerion, warm breath against his face, hands threaded to through his hair. Oh, no, no, no. He saw that trap a mile away. No way was he stepping on it. I think she's a good friend, someone I can rely on. Her eyes narrowed and she planted one first on her hip. Is that all you think? Rhaenyra wasn't making a lick of sense. He said as much. You're not making any sense. What do you want me to say? I want no, never mind. You've clearly had too much to drink tonight. Pain flashed across her face before it went blank again. I wish you good fortune, cousin. Enjoy your feast. Naruto grabbed for her shoulder, reeling her back in before she could bolt. Rhaenyra, wait. She went absolute berserk and squirmed out his grasp, tearing part of her dress to get free. He could have pursued her, could have caught her. He knew he could. But that would have made an awful scene. He had a feeling that was precisely what she wanted right now. Best to let her go. He snatched up his empty goblet, intent on filling it again. They could have gone better. A wry pang of amusement echoed in his head from Balerion. The dragon is young, yet she has her claws. Naruto pursed his lips. Oi, oi, don't you go speaking in riddles, too. Cousin. He turned to find Lina peeking around the corner. A wry smile touched the corner of his mouth. How much of that did you hear? Enough. She skipped to his side. She's being a good thing he wasn't drinking. He would have surely spat it out. You're too young to use that word. I'm really not. She giggled. I'm glad I found you. I came to say goodbye. His heart skipped. What? I'm leaving tomorrow. Lina grinned. Mother's taking me across the narrow sea. That was news to him. She is. His little cousin nodded. I want to look for V. Hager. If you can find Balerion, then I can find her. I just know I can. You think she's over there, somewhere? Her head bobbed in agreement. I know she is. And your father's all right with this. Meh. Lina grinned like the girl she was. Mother's the one who suggested it. He can't say no to her. Rhaenys, yes, she certainly had Corley's wrapped around her finger. Hesso's is a big place. It might take years to find her. An odd look flashed across her dark face. I can be patient. So it would seem. Strange choice of words on her part. Then good luck, little cousin. Lina looked at him for a long moment. Blast. He just wanted a drink. But that look of hers worried him. Was there something else you needed? When I come back, she dithered, wringing her hands together, I'll be a dragon rider. Just like you. Maybe then ... She trailed off. Maybe. Maybe what? Nothing. She panicked and bolted. I'll see you soon, cousin. Naruto watched her go. You know what, I'm starting to think this whole family is strange. Meh, to hell with it. He'd think on it in the morning. Until then ... More wine for him. Balerion could swim. Better than that, Black Dread could swim well. Naruto awoke early one muggy summer morning to a great deal of shouting in the Red Keep. When asked what in blazes was going on, he was soon told of it, although at first he didn't believe what he'd heard. Dragons swimming, impossible. Fire and water did not mix, surely. But there were too many mouths hollering the same words for it to be anything but true, and so he decided to look into it. By the time he finally made it down King's Landing to see for himself, the great worm had already made quite the ruckus in Flea Bottom. Sure enough, he found his partner slicing through the murky waters of Blackwater Bay like some giant leviathan, gliding through it all with eerie grace. He watched the sight with naked awe. He hadn't known dragons could swim. It shouldn't have come as a surprise, really. How else could the Black Dread have survived all these years across the narrow sea? Mercifully, there were no ships coming into port at the time, but the lack thereof didn't diminish his presence. The mere act of swimming on the dragon's part kicked up surf to lash the docks. More than a few workers were caught unawares by the current and dragged into the drink. Mercifully, none of them drowned and were soon hauled back to safety by their fellows. All the while, the Black Dread paid them little heed as he splashed about in the cool waters of the bay. He must be damn near weightless in that water. In the way he moved ... So why fast? Walking to the edge of the pier, he glimpsed corpses in the bay, not human but far larger. Whales, he realized. Balerion must have slaughtered an entire pod and dragged them back here. They hadn't even been dead for an hour, judging by the look of them. More than a few had been savaged by fire and fangs alike. Some had been bitten clean in half. Well, if something ever knocked the Black Dread into the sea, he would be just as if not more dangerous. For a moment, Naruto's mind conjured a wild scene of battle on the high seas, the Black Dread diving in and out of the depths, smashing entire fleets as scorpion bolts pinged harmlessly of his scales. What a lovely day. Striding out to the very edge of the dock, he planted a fist on his hip. He considered walking on water to reach Balerion, but no, the folk of Flea Bottom were already frightened enough. No need to terrify them any further. Having fun, are we? Yes. The dragon spoke curtly within his mind, but there could be no denying the dark satisfaction in his voice. I have feasted well. Well, I hope you're happy. You've spooked a lot of people. I have harmed no one. That may be so, but you've got to watch the ships. If you pulled this stunt when trading vessels came into port, we might have a problem. His gaze strayed back to the dead pod of whales. There were at least a dozen of them. An idea dawned. Don't suppose you could share one or two of those? The people down here would appreciate a decent meal. A ponderous pause followed. And then, is this your command? Wasn't commanding, just asking. Your will be done. All's well that ends well, he supposed. Still, he wondered how he was going to get out of the water without crushing the docks or tearing walls down. If he tried to just barrel his way out, that wouldn't work. He'd crush too many people underfoot. He'd have to circle back around to the cliffs, maybe even climb them before he was able to fly again. He was still thinking when Balerion rumbled a laugh and dove beneath the bay. His tail cracked out against the water's surface, producing a sharp pop. Then even that was gone. A moment passed. Another, now, another yet still. And then Blackwater Bay erupted, bursting upward in a great geyser, a black shape tearing up from within. Balerion erupted from the depths with a triumphant roar, 3/4 of his body clearing the abyss, shedding water as he went. Giant wings beat in an impressive down as they cleared the depths, briefly summoning hurricane fortunes as their master took flight. But the Black Dread wasn't finished. True to form, he swooped low and snatched up one of the larger whale carcasses in his claws as he went. A clench of said claws carved it in half and dropped it into the shallows. The intent was clear. Fleabottom would feast well tonight. Naruto shook his head with a rueful smile. What a lovely day. 000. Alicent found her prince at the docks. She'd expected such when news of Balerion reached the keep. Of course, Naruto had all but bolted to Fleabottom to prevent disaster. That much was expected. The prince had ever been a decent sort, eager to prevent shed whenever possible. It was only natural that he be down here to prevent the Black Dread from snatching up some hapless ship. She did not expect to see her intended helping the folk of Fleabottom carve up whale carcasses like some common butcher. He didn't even have his king's guard with him. Was he mad? Even she didn't dare come down here without at least 2 of her household guard. Perhaps he was crazed after all, because the heir to the Iron Throne walked among the people of Fleabottom without fear, barking orders ... and they listened to him. Everywhere she looked, men were crawling over the corpses like ants, stripping them down with ruthless efficiency. Not a bit of today's catch would be wasted. She'd read about whales, difficult creatures to catch, let alone kill, but their bodies were a bounty to all. The meat would be used to feed hundreds, if not thousands, the oil used to light lamps, cartilage and organs for medicines. Even the baleen could be woven into baskets and used for fishing lines. She'd heard tell that it was even used as roofing material in the warmer climates of Dorne. This simple act of kindness would make him even more beloved by the small folk. Naruto had a tendency to do that, a way of making miracles out of even the darkest disaster. There we go. She watched him help men haul a massive strip of meat into a cart. And make sure you cook that before it spoils, he shouted at them. Better safe than sorry. They all bowed to him. Yes, Dragon Lord. Of course, Dragon Lord. Right away, Dragon Lord. Why nickname? He muttered something under his breath, cleaned his hands on a rag and looked away. Bright eyes lit up when he saw her. Alicent. Gods above, why did he have to say her name like that? It made her knees weak and her heart leap into her throat. These days since their first flight together, she couldn't look at him for more than a few seconds without blushing. Judging by the heat in his face, he felt the same. She found herself stepping closer to him, and he, her. A few Fleabottom folk whistled and cackled their way. They did so love a good show. He grabbed her, drawing her in a firm embrace. Alicent melted into it with a sigh. Oh, how father would gloat when he heard of this. But she didn't dare. She drew away, looking up at him. Why do they call you Dragon Lord? You can blame Balerion for that one. He let her go, almost reluctantly, and looked out toward the bay, watching the Black Dread wheel about the clouds. He's been at it since his stunt this morning. He chortled. I think he's enjoying himself. Balerion roared above them and the world shook. Alicent opened her mouth to reply. Words failed her when she saw the whale corpses still being dragged from the bay. This wasn't a dragon. This was a force of nature. This was death. Magnificent, isn't he? Naruto turned back to watch Balerion wheel away, snatching up another whale carcass in the water for himself as he went back to roost. Not the word I'd use, my prince. She flushed when he quirked a brow and hastened to amend her response. But yes, he's remarkable. Gorgeous beast. The two of you have bonded well. He's not a beast to me. Her love granted her a wry grin. No matter how big he gets, how terrifying to everyone else, he's my friend. Talk with him. You might be surprised. Alicent winced, recalling her first flight together. If she was alone with him again, she wouldn't be able to control herself. That might not be wise. Naruto laughed. Don't worry, I'm sure Balerion likes you. She blinked. What makes you say that? You're still alive. Why, brave boy. He truly had no fear at times. Rhaenyra was looking for you. His face closed down. Lady Alicent Hightower, a voice called to her before she could pursue the subject. My lady. She turned to face the speaker, a man wearing the colors of her house, with a scowl. What is it? Can you not see that we're busy? The messenger bowed deeply. The king wishes to speak with you, my lady. At once. Again her stomach plummeted. Very well. Go on. Naruto waved her away. I'll be here for a few hours yet. She chewed her lower lip. Will you come visit tonight? My Valerion's getting rusty. Something sparked in his eye. I just might. Alicent dithered, not wanting to part with him just yet. People were watching. She really shouldn't. Bugger it. She lunged forward and at his cheek. Just a peck. A feather's brush really. Naruto made a startled noise, but she was already moving, guards in tow. The people of Flea Bottom cheered in her wake. For their future king and queen. Rhaenyra seethed at her window. Even now, her cousin didn't understand. Why didn't Naruto understand? She wanted him to, more than anything. She was angry with him, yes, oh so angry, yes, but she was also hurting. She wanted him to come to her, apologize to her, set things right. Because he had betrayed her. Even if he hadn't realized it, the treachery was his. In the span of a single day he had taken everything from her. Father's attention, their family's dragon, her position, even Alicent. There was something going on between the two of them, but she didn't know what. Whatever it was, it had changed the dynamic between them. They spoke less and less these days in Naruto. These days he avoided her, refusing to even speak with her. His silence hurt more than words. He'd held her that night mother died and rocked her to sleep as he hadn't since she was small. It had brought her some small semblance of peace, made her think things could be as they were before. To be as they were, to have no worries or carries. Now this nonsense with Blackwater Bay. He could be here in the Red Keep with her. Instead he was out bandying about among the peasants. What next would he sing to them as well? There had to be a way to turn the tables. To make him look at her again, to make him understand. There just had to be. Some way, someone, somehow. She wanted her old life back. When he only ever looked at her. But she couldn't go back to those days. Things would never be the same. Rhaenyra flung herself onto her bed, curled up with her pillows, heaved a sigh ... and tried not to cry. Someone knocked at her door. Rhaenyra raised her head. Who is it? Alicent felt like a princess. The king had summoned her to his chambers, and at father's bidding she'd worn her finest white dress to meet him. Not one of mother's, he'd said. It wouldn't do to give the king untoward ideas, and for once she agreed, but rather a reserved gown with gold-embroidered sleeves that hid her body beneath its loose folds. Which was all to the good, because the king was asking a great many questions of her. Strange as it might sound, it was true ever since her short-lived flight on Balerion's back. Tell me, how is Rhaenyra? She blinked, somewhat baffled by this latest question. What do you mean, Your Grace? These days she doesn't say more than a few words to me at a time. King Viserys looked away, absently fiddling with one of his stone-carved dragons. I think she might fight it. Difficult to discuss personal matters. Alicent winced. That was putting it mildly. It's only been a year, she said instead. It will take some time. It did when I lost my own lady mother. The king ceased wringing his hands and set the dragon down. I wish she would approach me. An idea dawned. Alicent seized upon it. What if you went to her instead? If only I could. The king sighed. There are times when I would rather face the Black Dread himself than mine own daughter of 6 and 10. Curiosity piqued in her mind. He was your dragon, wasn't he? Once, but no longer. Saying the word seemed to exhaust him. He rejected me, as all of King's Landing saw. I am lucky to be alive. Have you not thought to seek a new one? After all these years, a peal of bitter laughter tumbled from his lips. Who would of me who could possibly want a failure such as I? Alicent pitied the king. Truly, she did. But what could one say to that? Silence stretched between them. Alicent took the chance to drift back to the last subject. I think Rhaenyra would open herself to you if invited. She said, you have an easy way about you, Your Grace. ... At least someone thinks so. You do not mention our talks to Rhaenyra, do you? A haunted look flashed through the king's gaze as he looked to her. It's just, I fear she wouldn't understand them. She most certainly would not. Rhaenyra would almost certainly leap to the wrong conclusion. How she'd become an advisor to the king in these matters, she'd never know. But enough about me. A hint of life came back to him. I would hear your thoughts of my nephew. Oh, dear. Why, Your Grace. Viserys smiled. You are fond of him? No. Her face grew warm, most warm indeed. I am, and I understand you had him down at the docks today. He already knew about that. Why, blasted spies. She should have known. Alicent squirmed in her seat and wrung her hands in her lap, unwilling to look at him. I may have. Do you make him happy? No, ignore that question. Does he make you happy? Her face grew most warm indeed, hotter than the sun itself. ... Yes. And the king finally smiled at her. Shall I fetch him for you? Whatever for. There is something I wish to show you. Both of you. There you are, nephew. Well. Didn't this feel familiar? Naruto fought down a sigh as the king's guard closed the door behind him. He'd done good work down in Flea Bottom today, he knew he had, but he'd hardly expected to be dragged to the king's chambers the moment he returned. Viserys' room was much as he remembered it. He knew the lay of the land well enough by now. There was the stone reconstruction of old Valyra standing in the center of the room, and there, off to the side, a burning brazier. There was something in it, but he couldn't quite see it from here. Alicent was sat beside Viserys. She looked positively pale. Naruto quirked a brow her way. Did something happen while I was away? Not at all. There is something I wish to show you. His uncle stood from his seat beckoning to them. Alicent as well. Both of you. Come. Alicent flicked him an anxious glance and she shrugged. He didn't miss the way she nestled against him, tucking herself into his side. Something had clearly spooked her, rattled her even, if she was clinging to him like this. He absently drew her arm, tugging her along with him as they followed the king. Belatedly he realized what was in the flames. Viserys had left his dagger in a brazier, superheating the steel. This dagger once belonged to Aegon the Conqueror. The king walked towards it and showed it to them. It was Enar's before that, and before the ... Well, the king shrugged. It is difficult to know, but before Aegon's death, the last of the Valyrian pyromancers hid his song in the steel. He tugged the blade from the brazier, held the glowing steel out for them to read. Here, I would have you read this. Together, the two of them leaned closer to inspect the steel. And they read, "From my come the prince that was promised, and his will be the song of ice and fire." Well, read. Viserys made a pleased noise behind them. Which brings me to the next matter. His uncle's hands came down upon them, one to each of their shoulders. Naruto Targaryen, my nephew. Lady Alysanne Hightower. Naruto stiffened and Alysanne with him. There was something in his voice just then. Will you take one another as husband and wife? Marriage. The word banged about in Naruto's head, ricocheting around like a rowdy racing gun. It haunted him, tormented him. In truth, he wasn't entirely opposed to it. It all sounded so simple on the surface. Perhaps it was. Viserys had asked him and Alysanne to wed, not commanded them. No demands were being made, no orders given, and they hadn't been dragged to the altar, as it were. Instead, his uncle gave them both time to think on it, to consider what might be for the best of them as much as the realm. Thinking was precisely the problem. In giving them time to think, Viserys had knowingly or otherwise planted the seed in his heart. And likely Alysanne's as well. Naruto couldn't get her out of his head. He cared for her deeply, he always had, but now he'd begun to imagine her as the mother of his children. His mind had all but run away with the idea. He'd had children in his first life long ago, but the idea of being a father again was strangely stimulating. He couldn't help but dwell on the idea. He'd toyed with the idea of Aegon, but that was just too arrogant for his liking. Aemon and Daemon would be the names for the first two boys, he decided, then Helena for a girl. He'd raise them right, and any children that came afterward ... Well, that was a matter for another time. Best not put the cart before the horse and all that. Such a future still seemed far off, but now he'd begun to give it serious thought, to consider this madness. Otto would probably be thrilled, which annoyed him. He'd need to speak with him soon, deal with him before he got too big for his britches. I believe Sir Criston would make a fine member of the Kingsguard. Rhaenyra's voice had him blinking. And what now? Naruto pursed his lips. It took him a moment to remember where he was, and another blink to recall what he was doing here. He stepped forward upon the balcony and gazed straight toward the men assembled in the plaza below. Viserys coughed once behind him and his mind came back to the present. Right. They were here to choose new members of the Kingsguard, were they? No. They'd lost 3 in recent days, one of old age, another choking on his food. Another had simply vanished. ... One of those 3 was decidedly more noble than the rest. Do stop spacing out, cousin. His gaze strayed back to the armored men, and sure enough, he found Criston Cole among them. The knight that had disappointed him, the tourney, the one whom he'd thought might be reborn like him, reincarnated. He really didn't want to have anything to do the man, but he had to toss Rhaenyra a bone. It would be pointless to fight over something so trivial. He wouldn't let her rile him. Why old Viserys had brought the two of them here, he'd never understand. Did he really think they would make up so easily? Fine. He waved a hand at her. He's all yours. Will you not choose one of your own? Naruto tried to ignore the bite in her voice and the challenge therein. He really, truly did. Rhaenyra, of course, you never listen to anything I have to say. She prattled on. Why would you now pick one and be done? His temper slipped his grasp, and so did his tonnage. Why must you always be this way? I know not what you mean. Enough. Viserys snapped at them both, causing each to jump. Both of you. Naruto and Rhaenyra exchanged a black look between one another. The crown cannot stand strong while the House of the Dragon remains divided. He glared them both into silence before they could protest. You will cease this fighting at once. You are family. Do you understand? ... Yes, uncle. As you wish, father. Good. He coughed into a fist. Can I trust the two of you to handle this matter alone without tearing into one another? Naruto looked to Rhaenyra. She shrugged one shoulder sullenly. If he behaves, I will. Truce, he offered. THW word, a proverbial olive branch. ... Very well. Excellent. The king was all too eager to accept it as such. He failed to see the tension simmering underneath. I'll leave you to it, then. Another cough. Naruto couldn't help but notice just how tired Rhaenyra's father looked. I need to have a word with Otto. His piece said, he hobbled off, leaving them and the knights below them waiting in stoic silence. Naruto spoke into it. Can't we just get along? I don't want to fight with you. Rhaenyra's lower lip trembled just so as she whirled away. Was it his imagination? He hoped not. Silence reigned. His cousin sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose. Kick the next 2 and let's be done with this. It was as good as he'd get from her today. Naruto exhaled in a long-suffering sigh. ... Then I'll take that one. On a whim he looked around and picked out the most imposing of the lot, a great big brute clad in black iron armor and full helm. Though he stood head and shoulders above the rest. He bore no banner to speak of, only a great big bastard sword on his back and a massive shield in one hand. How he lifted that thing was anyone's guess. He looked strong, and there, carved into that shield, a great black dragon not unlike that of Balerion. Well, what did they have here? You. He indicated the tall fellow with a wave of the hand. Yes, you, he continued when the silent knight perked up. Odd, he hadn't said a word yet, not a single syllable. ... Could he truly not speak congratulations and welcome to the Kingsguard? He wanted nothing more than to be done with this farce and visit a licent, but there were procedures to observe and they'd never let him leave until he finished. Kneel. The giant lumbered forward and knelt. Even then, he made Sir Kristen Cole look small. A spark of curiosity kindled in Naruto's chest. Remove your helm. A pale face was revealed, shrouded by dark hair. Keen eyes met his. A good gaze. Strong, but not arrogant. Your name. Tarkus M. Lord. Here at last, the Black Knight spoke and finally bowed his head. Of black iron. Naruto felt his brow furrow as he failed to recall it. I've never heard of that house. The ghost of a smile touched the knight's face. It is new, your grace. And your surname, he asked. Snow. From the north. Are you? At his nod, he felt the ghost of a grin touch his whiskered cheeks. Good. I hear the north has strong warriors. Have you come alone? No, my lord. Tarkus bowed his head further still. My comrade Havel took ill on the road and is convalescing at a nearby inn. As such, he was unable to present himself before you today. I stand ready to take the oath in his stead. Rhaenyra hummed softly. You presume much, sir. Tarkus met her gaze, unflinchingly. I presume the truth. The king called for strong warriors. We are strong. Naruto ignored the byplay. Havel. Why did that sound familiar? This friend of yours, is he a bastard like yourself? Aye. And is he strong? He asked. Tarkus lifted his chin. The strongest in the north, my lord. I once saw him split a grown man in two with his dragon tooth club. He had a weapon carved from a dragon's tooth. Balerion might not like that. And why have you come? I'm not one for subtlety, your grace. Tarkus seemed to chew on his words for a moment, then shrugged. Allow me to be frank. He waved him on. The men of the north were known for their bluntness. In the old days, Torrhen Stark knelt to one dragon, and one alone. Balerion the Black Dread. We would serve that dragon again. You cannot be serious. Rhaenyra's complaint snapped him back to reality. He's clearly a bastard. Why would you want someone like that guarding you? Tarkus raised his gaze. Begging your pardon, princess, but that's not for you to decide. I came here to swear my sword to the prince, not you. Rhaenyra bridled. No. Naruto interposed himself between them both before someone could say something foolish. I'll accept your oath on his behalf if I find him worthy. You will lead me to him tomorrow. As to the rest of you, he looked past him to the discontent knights. Had he hurt their feelings? Tough. Bunch of upjumped ponces, this lot. He best could them with both hands tied behind his back and blindfolded besides. Why should he care what they thought? Thank you for your time. You are dismissed. Tarkus bowed his thanks. Naruto kept smiling. He didn't drop the facade until everyone was gone. Are you mad? The very moment they were, Rhaenyra rounded on him. You haven't even met the man. I will. Didn't you hear me? I intend to meet him tomorrow. When she didn't falter, he chose the gentle path. You said the next two were mine to choose. At her reluctant nod, he barreled on. If you can pick a man with combat experience, then so can I. We need those. He said so yourself. Better to have proper warriors with actual combat experience guarding your father than these idiots, right? Another nod now as she gripped her right arm. Her eyes flitted to his in a way. You ran roughshod over me in front of everyone. That wasn't my intent. He patted her head, drawing a fearsome pout from his cousin. You know that, don't you? She glowered up at him. Sometimes it feels like I don't know you at all. Ouch. That hurt more than he cared to admit. His temper stirred. Then talk to me, he said instead, carefully concealing that burst of anger now as he took his hand from her head. We're family, aren't we? I suppose. Then trust in me a little. He delivered a quick to her forehead, causing her to still. As I trust you. Well, he trusted her to be an unpredictably moody girl sometimes, but he wasn't about to tell her that now, was he? At least he didn't have to fear a dagger in the back from her. Of all the dwellers in the Red Keep, he knew Rhaenyra at last wouldn't try to kill him. She didn't have the heart for it. And speaking of need, a Kingsguard had need of strong, loyal warriors, not tourney knights who had never tasted true on their blades. The men of the north were well known for such. Hopefully she would understand that in time. Naruto didn't linger after that. He left a red-faced Rhaenyra to her thoughts and walked away down the hall. As he did, he let his mind wander. Rhaenyra still baffled him, even months after their argument. At times she acted hostile, but he could tell her heart wasn't in it these days. Surely she wasn't fighting him solely for the sake of fighting. She couldn't be that foolish. He didn't want to believe it. Lashing out was understandable after losing a family member, let alone a parent, and he knew that pain all too well, but her temper was taking a terribly long time to cool. He really should have another talk with Viserys. Maybe he could help him make sense of this wild, chaotic, baffling girl. It's all worked out quite nicely for you, hasn't it, my lord? Naruto very nearly snarled. Again, can't a man be left to think in peace? Evidently not. He looked up, torn from his thoughts once more. Seemed to be happening an awful lot today. That was the third time today. He'd need to watch that. It wouldn't do to become too distracted. Someone might walk right up and knife him in the back if he wasn't careful. Not that such would kill him, of course, but still, it was the principle of the matter. But he needn't fear that today. He raised his gaze, carefully painting a pleasant smile upon his face once more. An unfamiliar man limped his way, leaning heavily upon a cane. He recognized him at a glance, if only because no one else had a leg like that. Clubfoot. Balerion growled in his head, making his expressed displeasure known for the first time today. Wretched worm. Not worthy of eating. SHH, don't say that aloud. Lord Larry's strong. He spoke slowly, drawing out each word as one might something foul. How fares you, brother Harwin? I don't believe we've met. We haven't, Naruto simpered back. But I've heard of you ... Only good things, of course. That gave him pause. Good. He didn't trust a slimy soul like this. At least his father Lionel served well enough on the small council. With Demon and most of House Balerion off dealing with the stepstones, there was a sizable power vacuum in the Red Keep at the moment. Only natural that someone would try to fill it. But why did it have to be him? He shook his head, pushing aside his inherent suspicion of strangers. How can I help you? I merely wish to meet you face to face. The second son surprised him with a limpid bow. To see if you lived up to your reputation. A pale brow rose. And, I am satisfied. His smile didn't waver. May you have a most pleasant day, you Grace. And do tell Balerion I said hello. Command me. I will crush him. No, he said after a moment's pause. He's trying to get a rise out of us. Naruto watched Larry's hobble past with a scowl. A Game of Thrones never changed, it seemed. Someone always wanted something. Rhaenyra wanted her mother back. Lyson wanted love. Lena wanted to prove herself. Viserys wanted to preserve the Targaryen line, while Otto wanted said line protected for the good of the realm. He had no idea what Larry Strong wanted, and that worried him. The man rubbed him wrong way. He couldn't even say why. Perhaps he might suffer an accident in the future. Such a shame that would be. After all, cripples tripped all the time. Two hooded figures met once more. Not in an alley this time, but a bar of all places. Must we be here? The shorter of the two complained bitterly. Fleabottom reeks. None will hear us, I assure you. The first assured the second in measured tones. Do you have what I asked for? The second slid a piece of sealed parchment his way. Excellent. The first considered the sigil stamped into the wax for a long moment, then stowed it up his sleeve with quick dispatch. A king is weak. He continued to pace, more despair of him every day. Most will likely abandon him in the years to come. And what of his heir? The first shrugged. Suitable for our needs. More pliable than his father, at any rate. Though I have no desire to face him on the field. With luck, you won't have to. Luck, you says. There is no such thing as luck in this world. If there were, we wouldn't be here skulking about in the dark like a pair of common cut purses. We remained united, then. For now, so long as our interests align. Then the plan proceeds apace. The plan proceeds. Two glasses clinked together. The conspirators drank deeply, and so Westeros plunged ever closer to war, with not a soul to hear. Have you considered leaving the capital for a time? Naruto clicked his tongue and bit it until the pain centered him. It brought him clarity. He'd known this was coming after his argument with Rhaenyra, but he hadn't expected it to come quite so quickly. Seeking out Viserys might have been a mistake after all. Still, it was too late to take it back now. Runestone might be my inheritance, but I don't intend to terrorize the Vale anytime soon. He threw himself into a chair. Let the steward run the castle for now. Viserys tutted softly. It might benefit you to see the lands you would rule. I agree, he nodded, but doing so would leave you undefended. You needn't worry about me. I can defend myself. He frowned. Evidently the king wasn't taking the hint. He'd have to channel a bit of demon here, the best parts, not the worst. Are you that eager to step aside? The old king flinched. I know you're still hurting. He looked to him with pity, quietly quelling the silent pang of sorrow in his chest. You had an impossible choice to make that day. It cost you your wife, your son, and now it might take your life. And then Balerion came back atop all that, only to reject you. Now even Rhaenyra's giving you a hard time. What would you have me do? Take another dragon, uncle. He sat up to look him in the eye, hoping he would understand. Do something. Anything. Don't just waste away like this. Show the realm your strength. He watched him intently for some sign of strength. Something, anything, but he saw none. Viserys sagged in his seat, weary beyond his years. I am afraid I have little left. Damn it. He'd come here to ask about Rhaenyra, not to deal with this. Nato blew out an exasperated breath. I can't force you, but you're going to waste away like this. You do realize that, don't you? Perhaps that is what I want. And what about your family? What of Rhaenyra? She will have a place in the court. The king waved his words aside with his good arm. And in yours, I hope. But what of a Lyson? The two of you seem rather close these days. Have you considered what I asked? I have. Way to ruin his good mood. Yes, I'm sure Otto's ecstatic. Viserys tutted. You still don't trust him. He huffed. No, I don't. Viserys considered him for a long moment. And who do you trust? I trust you. He looked away with a grumble. I trust Alicent. I want to trust Rhaenyra, but she is in mourning. Nephew, give her time. He flung up an arm. It's been a year. We are the of the dragon, dear boy. A rare laugh left his uncle's lips. Our tempers often run hot. Perhaps a few more months should give her flames time to cool. But on to other matters. You must be careful. The realm stands upon a knife's edge. Every lord paramount saw Balerion on the day I named you heir, and he has been active of late. We cannot hide him much longer. Wasn't going to. You misunderstand. A hint of steel crept into the king's voice. The realm stands upon a knife's edge. And there is another matter. Naruto stilled. He didn't like the sound of that. Lord Corley sent me a raven. His throat went dry. I thought he was still in the stepstones. He is, but that doesn't preclude him from sending messages across the narrow sea. Here, sure enough, he fished the letter in question out of his tunic. See for yourself. The seal was already broken. He unfurled it slowly. Your Grace, he mumbled the words aloud, summarizing it quite nicely amidst all the flowery prose. It would do me great honor if your heir were to take the hand of my daughter, Lena, in marriage. What in blazes is this? His brow shot into his hair. Me with little Lena, she's just a child. Then wait until she is of age. Viserys shrugged his good shoulder. Should she find Viagra, she may have a beast to rival Balerion. Nothing can rival him. He crumpled the letter up and threw it in the hearth, leaving it to burn. And didn't you say I could choose who I married? You just asked me to marry a licensed. I did, and you can. Despite the battered state of his body, the king didn't flinch. Damn him. I am merely counseling you in these matters, as a good uncle would his nephew. Not very good counsel. Viserys smiled. You could, of course, marry them both. Naruto nearly choked on his own spit. Was it hot in here all of a sudden? You're a Targaryen. His uncle prattled on, mistaking his silence for acceptance. Moreover, you're my heir, the heir to the Iron Throne. Such would be well within your rights. No, they were not having this conversation. Flushing, he rose from his chair with all due haste, paced past the miniature carving of old Valiera, and moved to the balcony. Even from here he could see Balerion on the horizon, wheeling overhead. He envied him sometimes. How freeing it must be to simply fly away from one's problems, to be so powerful that none would dare question you, let alone tell you what to do. Dragons had it easy. Being human ... now that was difficult. I could fly to the stepstones. He mused aloud, burn out the crab feeder. Viserys rasped laugh. You sound like your father. You're sure you won't marry? No. Viserys lifted his chin, mildly impressing him. I will not, as I said before. It would take a remarkable woman indeed for me to even consider such. He looked past him, back to his stone carvings, and stifled a cough against his fist once more. I will never love another as I loved your aunt. Another coughing fit seized him, this one harsher than the last. Naruto quirked a brow his way. You've been coughing an awful lot lately. I'm well enough. His uncle slumped in his seat. Now, if it's all the same to you, I would like some time alone. Naruto was more than happy to grant that request. He all but fled from the room. He had the sinking suspicion Viserys wasn't well. And if one day that health finally failed him, ... he dreaded what came next. Marriage. Gods be good, marriage. Her and Naruto. Together. The thought was heady. Dangerous, too. Alicent knew the risks of entertaining such notions. Going after the most eligible noble in all the 7 kingdoms ... she must have a death wish. Just thinking of it had her burying her face in a pillow with a keening whine. The noise was muffled in her chambers, with not a soul to hear. Thank the gods for small mercies. Mercy. Was that what this was? Naruto was her prince, and the king wanted her to marry him. She should have been happy, delighted, overjoyed. It should have been simple. Nothing was simple in King's Landing. Alicent didn't dare bring this to her father, if only because she knew precisely what his counsel would be. Convince him, seduce him, win the throne. The thought made her sick. She hadn't had Naruto out of some damnable duty. She was fond of him. She enjoyed his company. She wanted to be with him. To even suggest that such was a plot to elevate her family ... it made her boil. Naruto could certainly be a bit reckless at times, but she cared for him, had cared for him, for quite some time now. Father would pat her on the back, congratulate her, and tell her to do her duty, as if he'd planned this all along. Piss on that, a small voice hissed in her head. We chose him. Us, not father. ... She really had, hadn't she? Perhaps he had chosen her. Hadn't he? Oh gods, what if he hadn't? What if he chose someone else? ... Why in the 7 hells was she sitting around for? Then she had to act. In a panic, Alicent burst to her feet. She grabbed her book. Someone knocked on his door. Naruto had an inkling who it might be. The hour was late, but not so late as to refuse guests. He could have feigned sleep and turned them away. But he didn't, because he knew who it was. Sure enough, when he swung open the door ... well, there she was. Alicent stood before him, hair done up, clad in a pale white gown of finest silk ... and clutching a heavy tome tight to her chest as though it were some sort of shield. He had no doubt she'd brain him with it if he said something to upset her. The thought made him smile. She stared at his feet and nowhere else. I'm here for my lessons. Lessons. Right, he remembered now. He was still teaching her Valerian, wasn't he? It had been a bit since their last session. He stepped aside and let Alicent in, closed the door behind her. The second he did, she dropped the book. Their eyes met. Naruto saw the unspoken question in her eyes. He steeled himself. They shouldn't. They really shouldn't. This was wrong, wasn't it? Alicent stepped forward and touched a trembling hand to his chest. With the other, she reached up, pulled the pins out her and let it tumble free down her back. God, yes, how long had it been since he'd seen her with her hair down? She looked lovely tonight. The very vision of beauty. Surely she wasn't going to. She was gonna. Wait. He caught her wrist in his grip before she could do anything she might have to regret. You don't have to force yourself. ... Is that what you fear? Her eyes held his. No one is forcing me to do this. Not my father, not yours, not anyone. She stepped to him and he felt her body's heat press against his through the gossamer thin fabric of her gown. I'm tired of dancing around this. I've made my decision. She pushed her hand forward, not resisting, but reaching up to cup his cheek as he continued to grip her wrist. I choose you. Leaning up on the very tips of her toes, she planted on his chin. Do you choose me? His brain fizzled. He was still formulating that thought when Alicent tugged her hand free. She reached up with both hands, hooked her thumbs in the shoulders of her gown ... and let it drop. Fine fabric pool at her feet. ... She wasn't wearing anything underneath. In an instant all Naruto's arguments fell flat. His throat went drier than Dorn. All semblance of thought fell to the wayside. Her hand touched his and Naruto felt a pleasant thrill shoot down his spine as he reciprocated the motion in kind. She'd worn perfume tonight, just the kind he liked. He wanted her, perhaps almost as much as she sought him. He wasn't sure who moved next, in all fairness, him or her. It didn't matter really. Someone did, and that was that. He found hers in his arms, her mouth on his, felt his hands rise to cup her waist as he drew her closer, her own fingers fumbling at his trousers. Her mouth was warm on his, fierce and insistent, and it was all he could do to return the favor, such was her passion. In all his years, he'd never felt so alive. Perhaps that was the risk talking, the heady realization that someone might walk in on them at any moment. He paused, made wary by the thought. Don't you dare. Alicent hissed at him. Stop and I swear I'll gut you. She realized what she'd said a moment later and flushed. I'm sorry, she gasped. I didn't mean. He grabbed her by the rear and drew her closer, biting her lip. Always nice to see you show some spine. Alicent was silent for a long moment, until her eyes flashed. Then she jumped him. They never made it to the bed. Silken sheets, warmth nestled against him in his bed, an almost pleasant soreness pervading every inch of his body. Dazed though Naruto was, it only took him a moment to get his bearings. And what wonderful bearings they were. The quick glance confirmed his initial confusion. He wasn't alone. Alicent lay sound asleep at his side, half sprawled atop his chest, head tucked into him, and not a stitch of clothing to her name. Come to think of it, he wasn't wearing anything either beneath the sheets. ... Oh dear. His mind loosed a singular bleat of confusion before he remembered the events of last night. I choose you. Do you choose me? Clothes falling to the floor, a flurry of movement. Her mouth on his hands on her hips, her hands in his hair, her hips grinding against his as she cried out his name. Oh. So last night hadn't been a dream after all. Good. He might have gone mad if that were the case. Alicent certainly seemed content enough. She remained sound asleep where she lay, dead to the world. That was a frightfully red mark near her neck. He coughed a little, terribly embarrassed. Had he bit her that hard she'd left a mark or two on his chest, but one near her nape was so very visible. Most people would see it and begin to gossip. Bah, let them, the pious pack of parasites. What did they know, anyway? Somewhere near the bluffs of King's Landing, he could feel Balerion stirring, eager to fly and hunt. Good for him. He had more pressing concerns. He laid one palm over his eyes and contemplated rising to face the day, but he was quite comfortable where he was. In truth, he had no real desire to move. He ran a hand through her hair, drawling a pleased noise from her even in her slumber. She cuddled closer, practically clinging to him, lips creasing in a pout. ... Yup, definitely not moving now. Patiently, he settled into wait. His faith was rewarded. Soon enough, his intended began to stir. Slowly at first, then quickly now as she came around. Her eyes fluttered open to meet his, widened for a moment. He saw the precise second she remembered because rather than retreat as she might have before, she scooted closer and pressed herself into him with wanton abandon. Her lips alighted upon his chin in a long, lingering, "Good morning, my prince." Prince, not lord. 4 little words, and yet they conveyed so much, so many things. A morning greeting, a plea not to be pushed away, and beneath it all ... lust. She wasn't trying to manipulate him, no one could, and he'd not let them. Far from it, she simply didn't want to let go of him. He had her forehead in return. She moved to stand, reluctant to leave. I should go. Desire sparked in him and he grabbed at her wrist. Stay. I can't. She dithered but didn't try to break free. We should have waited until we were wed. People will talk. I don't care. He was so very sick and tired of caring, of fretting and fussing over the rules. I know. The ghost of a smile tugged at her lips. That's I'll come back later tonight. Why, so they could dance around this and hide it from everyone, keep it secret? No. He wasn't having it, if only because he knew how such things ended. So did Alicent, judging by the look in her eye. Why hide it now? They had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Maybe it was foolish to flaunt this, but he was so very tired skulking about in the shadows. Nay, no more, no longer. No, he bit off the word. No more hiding. He gave her a gentle tug, drew her back into his lap, and ate her softly on the lips. She quivered against him. We shouldn't. We absolutely should. Who cares what they say? Another, and she responded to him with a, you make a compelling argument. Of course I do. He had the nape of her neck, drawing a pleased noise from her. Do you want to keep hiding, or do you want to live? A rhetorical question, of course. He already knew her answer, and so did she. He felt her resolve weakening with every little anxious gasps of raw excitement fleeing from her lips as he tormented her with a torrent of ease. It was only a matter of time. He watched the conflict flash across her face as he ate her saw her struggle against her carnal desires a moment more. ... and fell. Soon enough she began to respond in kind to his ministrations, her arms looped around his neck, then her hands his hair as she held on for dear life. She was wet and ready for him. Bouncing in his lap, it did wonderful things to brief pain of last night forgotten in its entirety. In a matter of moments she was writhing under his touch, locking her legs round his waist, the better to draw him deeper. He saw the fire in her eyes, the refusal to let go until he gave her what she waned. By contrast, her release came quickly, elraving her beneath his touch. She fell back to the bed with a pleased sigh. Not yet satisfied, he began lavish ease upon her lips, followed by her lower now, his lips alighting upon her thighs, which he gently tugged apart. She made a noise of confusion. "What are you?" Then he had her. There, the Lycan gasped aloud, a noise of such visceral delight that he stopped for fear of having hurt her. He paused and she glared at him from where she lay, face flushed red, gasping for air, his hands still on her knees. The ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth and she flushed anew. "Don't stop." It was a cry for more as much as a plea. He returned his attention to her folds while she covered her mouth with one hand to stifle the little gaps of delight that fled from her lips. They didn't leave their room until the afternoon. They couldn't have. Rhaenyra didn't want to believe it. Surely they wouldn't do such an awful thing to her. When Lord Larry Strong told her of what he'd seen, she hadn't wanted to believe him. It just it wasn't possible. But the signs were all there. If one knew where to look. She had seen it all, hiding round the corner. She dearly wished she hadn't, if only because the sight was now burned into her mind, hotter than any flame. Alicent had emerged from Naruto's chambers with her hair down, face flushed and clothes ruffled. That was damning enough. And then she'd seen it. Oh, yes, she saw it all. Her dear friend, the one person whom she trusted more than anyone else, turned back at the door as though to speak to someone, and then he had been there, holding her, letting her throw her arms round his neck and They'd shared a long lingering. She'd only seen a glimpse of it before darting back into cover, but seen she had. Alicent had departed soon thereafter. She'd heard the click of her heels, even if she hadn't dared to look. Naruto had left some time afterward, looking not smug, but content. He never noticed her, never even deigned to check her little hideaway. And so she hid back behind the pillar and waited there, unwilling to move until the last of his footsteps receded into the distance. With their absence, her heart broke. Misery, misery, misery. That was what he'd chosen. She had to confront him, had to say something, but calmly. She must be calm. She mustn't lose her temper. She must she must oh, sod it all. Her rage was rising, her temper triggered, her wrath roused. She wanted to shout and scream and spit to show him what it was like to be hurt, to know pain. Perhaps she should show him what it felt like. Viserys raised his cup. "You seem quite pleased with yourself, old friend." Otto hid a smile behind his chalice as he drank. A fair question indeed. Was he pleased? Yes, he was. He found he was, remarkably, given all that had transpired. Events in Alicent had exceeded his expectations tenfold. His dutiful daughter had done her duty without being asked. Indeed, she seemed to have the prince well in hand. Why, it was as if she actually loved him. Nonsense, of course. Alicent would do her duty. She would bear the prince's children. The throne would belong to the Hightowers. Nothing would stand in the way of that. Nothing could, now. Naruto knew there would be trouble as soon as he saw Rhaenyra's face. He could see it there behind her eyes, the anger boiling just below the surface. She was hurt, betrayed, furious. He could understand the former, but not the latter. Why react in such a manner? She acted as if she owned him, as though he were hers to claim. He was not. Nothing could be further from the truth. He was his own man. If she had a problem with this, she should have said something. Anything. But she hadn't now, had she? On a whim, he let her lead him to her quarters, the better to speak in sense. And well that he did, because the moment, nay, the very second the door closed behind him, you would choose her. A goblet bounced off his chest, spattering wine across his doublet. Over me. Oh, so she knew, then. I'm not choosing anyone over anyone. He ignored the spread stain, took her by the hands and tried to guide her back to the chair. Calm down, and let's talk about this. Is that all you have to say? Rhaenyra smacked his hand away with a hiss that reminded him so much of Syrax. You have chosen. I saw you with her. And what of it? He flung up his arms, exasperated. Why does it matter to you? Naruto saw the answer in her eyes and winced. Oh, dear. He'd never really thought of not considered. Look, if you're that upset, doesn't have to be just the two of us. He lowered his voice to a placating tone. Alicent cares deeply for you. She'd never deny you anything. If you just talk with her and explain yourself, your feelings, she'd welcome you with open arms. We can work this out among ourselves and come to an agreement. No need to throw things. It was the wrong thing to say, and he knew at the moment she went absolutely still against him. You would have me be second to her. That's not what I'm saying. Stop putting words in my mouth. I am no one's whore. I'm not calling you one here at last. His temper slipped its leash. If anything, you're acting like a spoiled brat. Rhaenyra's face closed down, eyes hardening to chips of stone. Get out. Stubborn girl, if you'd just listen to me, you'd see. She slapped him. Get out. His temper sparked. Mustn't give in. If that's what you want. He heaved a sigh. I'll give you some time to think. Her goblet bounced off his head. Out. Must. Remain. Come. As you wish. He steeled himself and walked away from her. The door slammed shut on him, striking his flank. He took the blow with quiet dignity and kept walking. After all, he'd made his choice. Now it fell to Rhaenyra to make hers. He heard her sobs echo through the hall after him. It was the beginning of the end, but to what he knew not. Battle lines had been drawn. Naruto saw them in every face he passed as he stalked through the halls towards the Iron Throne, flanked by his guards. heard them in every whisper, tasted them in the very tension of the air. Truth be told, he no longer cared for the Red Keep's simple spite and gutless gossip. He had made his choice and he would live with it. The nobles only shamed themselves by acting like this. It was inevitable, he supposed, perhaps even naive of him to believe otherwise, but he'd held out hope that everything would be all right once word of him and Alicent got out. In his foolishness, he believed the House of the Dragon would grow stronger once he announced their engagement, that the realm hold itself together. Instead, it had begun to fracture all too easily. All this in little more than a year. How quickly things changed, how quickly the nobles turned on another. Viserys did little to help. He seemed content to step back and let him speak in his stead these days. Today was another such day, forcing him to mediate the disputes of the realm and tend to other matters beyond his ken. He suspected his uncle would have handed the crown to him directly if he could get away with it. Only tradition and duty kept him from doing so, which was all to the good, so far as Naruto was concerned. He wasn't prepared to rule yet. He had enough to contend with already. Parasites, the lot of them. Even now some simpered for his sake, while others glared at him. All the while their words nagged at him in an endless animal bleat. There he goes again. Demon's boy. Getting too big for his britches if you ask me. Not even married and making Hightower's daughter spread her legs for him. She's some common whore. Has he no shame? SHH, he'll feed you to his dragon. He memorized their faces, smiled at them, and filed their names away for retribution. Tarkus rumbled a sigh behind his helm. Say the word and we'll clear out this pack of parasites for you. Havel grunted his agreement, eager to give his dragon-tooth club a swing. He had even less patience for such things. It would be our pleasure, your grace. Your grace. Ah, he wasn't even king yet, and everyone was acting like it was a foregone conclusion. Many of these people had bowed and sworn homage on the day Viserys named him heir, yet they turned their noses up at him now, not only because he bedded Alicent before marriage, oh no, but because the people loved him. The common folk couldn't stop singing his praises these days. His weekly oceanic jaunts with Balerion had seen Fleabottom eating better in this last year than it had in decades. The city feasted on a hefty bounty of whale and fish these days. Loved by the common folk, hated by the houses. Oh, the irony. Sometimes he wondered if it wouldn't just be easier to simply burn the nobles and be done with it. Just burn them all. Put the fear of fire in them right and proper. You know, at least the people of the realm contributed in their own way. They tilled the fields, ran the inns, sold their wares. What good were the nobles clinging to some semblance of importance, all thanks to their father's father or some such? It made him sick. So few of them did anything good for the realm anymore. He laid a hand on the hilt of his sword. More than a few noble sons and daughters flinched outright. Tempting, but no. He said the words for their sake as much as his own. They get to live for now. Naruto stalked past them, climbing the steps to the throne. Tarkus and Havel peeled off at the second step, ready to defend him if need be. There would be no need, he knew. He was perfectly capable of defending himself. The Iron Throne beckoned to him. He didn't want to sit in this damn chair and play court, no. He wanted to fly away to the stepstones and help Demon Father burn out the crab feeder. He knew he couldn't because that would leave Alicent and Rhaenyra alone. They'd tear one another to pieces. Rhaenyra has grown increasingly cold as the months went by, but as his friendship with her chilled, his relationship with Alicent only grew hotter. Alicent at least remained hopeful, desperate even to talk with her, but Rhaenyra simply wouldn't let her near. She wasn't letting anyone near, come to think of it. No one but that new knight of hers, Sir Criston Cole. What she did with him, if she did anything, was her own affair, but she was becoming outright hostile. It felt like the world stood on a knife's edge. The slightest nudge would send it flying off into salvation or disaster. He wasn't sure which. And all this because he loved Alicent. Really, he did. He despised the idea of giving Otto more power, but he did care for his daughter. Her father would have to go, however, and soon. Be it dismissal or an accident. Simple as. As to the how, he hadn't decided, but it had to be done, and soon. Before this pack of parasites got any more ideas. Balerion stirred on the cliffs, sensing his thoughts. I hunger. Naruto sighed. Hunger, was it? So did he. By the gods, he was starving for some action. He flung himself down on the Iron Throne, almost wishing it would cut him. It didn't, of course. That would be too easy. His gaze sought the crow below him and a sigh slipped from his lips. Shall we begin? It would appear that congratulations are in order, dear daughter of mine. Alicent knew that tone of voice far too well. It was nothing good. They are, I suppose. She picked at her food. Thank you. She willed herself not to look up from her meal, carefully carving the steak before her into bite-sized morsels as father looked on. It was not for her to falter here. She couldn't. She mustn't. She refused. If she looked at him now before she worked up the nerve, she would be lost. And that must not happen. He had no power over her, now. Not anymore. No matter what he might think. Whenever is the wedding? Whenever we wish. She lifted the fork to her lips and took a delicate bite, chewed, swallowed, then set to another. She, most pointedly, did not drink her wine. I see. She could almost hear the disappointment in her lord father's voice. The sooner you wed him, the better. This isn't about family, this is about securing our legacy. Her fingers tightened white-knuckled around her knife and fork. I love him. Of course you do. It was clear by his tone that Otto Hightower didn't believe her. Perhaps he was incapable of it. How cold his heart must be. It was hard, downright difficult at times, to believe she'd once called this man her father. Mother's death had changed him, and not for the better. These days he sought power and prestige above all else, no, to the exclusion of all else. She wondered if he even saw her as his daughter anymore. Doubtless she was just a pawn to him like so many others. When we wish. He scoffed. I beg your pardon. Here at last Alicent looked upon the man she once called father. I said, it will be when we wish. She fixed him with a steely glare. You did not choose him for me. I chose him and he chose me. Thus, it will be when we wish. He and I, not before. He looked surprised, but didn't challenge her for once. As you wish. Instead he steepled his fingers, laid his chin atop them, and attacked her where she was weakest. Still, an obstacle remains. I understand the princess is most distressed. Alicent ran cold at the unspoken threat lurking within his words. Rhaenyra will see reason. Father tilted his head. Will she? I understand she's been quite emotional as of late. She squeezed her knife harder, aching to drive it through his skull. Emotional, he said. Of course she was. It had been some time since she and Naruto begun their nightly endeavors, and she had feared this might happen. Oh gods, she would have to confront Rhaenyra before he did, or worst, before father took it into his head and decided to have her removed. As though she didn't already know what they were doing. There was something else, something she didn't dare speak of, not aloud. She touched a hand to her belly, and took a deep breath. For the future. Alicent found her in the grove. There she sat under the weirwood tree, shoulders hunched, peering into a book in the fading sunlight. Well, glaring more like. She didn't so much turn the pages as she did attack them, flipping from one to the next, every few seconds with a brisk and savage dispatch. Alicent couldn't help but wince at the sight. She'd seen that scowl of hers many a time before, and it was as much a warning as her silence. Rhaenyra. No response given. Won't you answer me? Silence reigned. No words whatsoever. Please, if we could just talk about this. She came closer, but her dear friend refused to even look in her direction. Alicent felt her heart clench in her chest. No, be brave. She'd known this would be an uphill battle from the start. Rhaenyra had a fierce temper. And a right to be angry, she supposed. They'd spent so long dancing around the matter now that she couldn't help herself. Their friendship, if it could be called that anymore, dangled by a thread. If they didn't repair it, she feared they would become the most bitter of enemies. She didn't want that, oh gods, anything but that. If she would just listen. Look at me. The boot snapped shut. Is that a command, Your Grace? Yes, she replied quickly, but it needn't be. None of this need be, Rhaenyra. She reached out for her wrist. If you would but listen. Keep away from me. She slapped her hand aside and jolted to her feet. You aren't the queen yet. Such anger in her voice. What could one do against such reckless hate? I didn't do this to become queen. Didn't you? Her eyes met her, red and damp. She must have been crying. You have no idea what it's like, do you? Her head tilted, regarding her like a dragon ready to bite. To have no power of your own. You've always done as your father asked, ever obeying like a good puppet. You must have jumped at the chance when he told you to bed him. Her pride prickled at the slight. That's not true. I love the prince, just as I love you. Love, she scoffed. What do you know of love? You stole him from me. Was that what this was about? You never showed any interest in him. I was never given the chance to. She flung up her arms with an outraged cry. Instead he took everything from me, my father's dragon, my birthright, even you, and now you have the nerve, the gall, to come crawling back to me, seeking forgiveness. Something in her heart hardened. I did not come here for forgiveness. No. Rhaenyra crossed both arms before her bosom and scowled defiantly. Then why are you here? Come. She mustn't get angry. Stay calm. She dared a step forward. Rhaenyra skittered backward, and so she took another, forcing her back again. I came here for understanding. There's nothing to understand. Rhaenyra took another step back, but failed when her back hit the very weirwood tree she'd been resting against. You betrayed me. You took him when he was never yours to take. The words tore open an old wound and her temper snarled free like a plume of dragon fire. Then you should have said something. Her dear friend flinched, scowled, then rallied. How long? Please don't let her know. How long what? How long have you been carrying Naruto's child? Alicent flinched. She tried not to, but she couldn't help herself. Rhaenyra saw it. How could she not? Oh yes, she saw, and something dark and ugly flashed across her face. You really are, aren't you? She stepped to her, and now it was she who retreated, warding one hand over her stomach. There's a little princess growing in your belly. Or a prince. Her smile turned bleak and a peal of bitter laughter tumbled from her lips. You were so eager to whore yourself out for him, and you think he loves you. More than you. Alicent cursed herself the moment the words left her lips. She hadn't meant to say that aloud. Words, her brief, petty rush of satisfaction wasn't worth it because now her dear friend looked livid. That tiny tableau of silence didn't last. Rhaenyra made a grab from her and she stepped back, retreating quickly. Her back smacked into a broad chest. What's going on here? Alicent whirled and found the prince himself standing behind her, flanked by Tarkus and Havel, face carved from stone. He laid a hand on her waist protectively and she shivered for all the wrong reasons. No, not like this. How much of that had he overhead? Some of it, all of it, none at all. She prayed for the latter. Alas, it was not to be. Nothing at all, my love. The stammer was painfully obvious, even to her. We were just talking. He looked to Rhaenyra. Then why did she lunge at you? You don't know, do you? She laughed a thim. His brow furrowed, baffled. Know what? Your whore is pregnant. Naruto froze. Alicent buried her face in both hands. She wanted to weep. Rhaenyra was actively trying to hurt her now, determined to wound her in the worst of ways. Cruel, spiteful, wicked. What had become of her dear friend? Was it truly too late to pull her back from the brink? But really, the outraged Targaryen prattled on, you shouldn't be surprised. I'm sure this was her plan all along, to get herself with your child and lock you into marriage. She laughed again, a bitter despairing sound. I don't know why you're so shocked. But what can one expect from a filthy Hightower? Her shoulders swayed in a shrug as she shook her head. For all their preaching, all their morals, they really are a pack of degenerates. And Naruto slapped her. Rhaenyra's head snapped to the side with a startled gasp. Stunned for a moment, it looked like she might burst into tears. Something deep inside her died in that moment. Alicent saw it. Her old friend touched a hand to her throbbing red cheek and sneered up at him. I shall wear this like a badge of honor. Naruto raised a fist and growled at her, his warning clear. Wear it in silence or I'll honor you again. Alicent took her prince by the wrist and dragged him away before they could come to blows. Or worse, she couldn't close the door behind them fast enough. The very moment she did, his eyes were on her. What's wrong? Nothing is wrong. She wrung her hands, stared at the wall to master herself, inhaled a deep breath, and took the plunge. What Rhaenyra said was true. She raised her head and looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes. A tiny little hiccup escaped her as they spilled over her cheeks. Something wonderful has happened. You're going to be a father. Naruto's face went blank. No, that wasn't the right word. His mind, his very existence, blanked out as his thoughts fizzled. Well, a small, rational part of him mused. That was bound to happen sooner or later. The rest started whooping with incoherent joy. Something along the lines of, I'm gonna be a dad, I must tell everyone. And he would. In hindsight, Alicent probably expected so many things from him in that moment: shock, anger, confusion at the very least. After all, she'd just sprung the mother of all surprises on him. She wasn't prepared for the sheer visceral flash of joy that swept across his face. In an instant he stepped to her side, swept her up heedless of her startled squeak, then spun her around and pulled her into his arms. Panic dawned a second later. I'm sorry. He set her down and stepped back, holding her by the waist. I shouldn't have done that. The baby, it's fine. She sobbed a little, a delighted, happy sound, and buried her face against his chest, nuzzling him. I'm not made of glass. You're not angry. Angry? Would he be angry? He was going to be a father again. He'd do things right this time, wouldn't screw things up as he had in his last life, before he'd given said life to Balerion so long ago. You're right, he gave Alicent a light squeeze. This the best news I've had all year. Who else knows? Do the Meisters? No, she shook her head. Just you and Rhaenyra. Her face crumpled and he read her like a book. She guessed. Rhaenyra Aw, shit. He hit her forehead with a sigh. I shouldn't have slapped her back there. He saw the worry in her eyes and dipped lower, lips lingering on hers. Now, it'll be all right. I'll talk to her. Everything's going to be all right. Alicent no longer believed it would be. Not at all. Conflict was coming. Naruto could see it in every face they passed, hear it in every whisper as they descended into the depths. It wasn't paranoia, though some may have styled it as such, but rather the simple truth. War was on the horizon. But none of that mattered now. Is this truly wise? Alicent exclaimed from what she heard from her beloved. Naruto grinned a little and gave her a nudge. You're mad. Alicent balked at him. He held up his fingers and pinched them together, just a little. He told her quietly, and while it was meant to be humorous, she didn't exactly see it that way. No, it's ludicrous, absolutely insane, I tell you. She balked at her intended. Naruto turned to face her and held her shoulders gently. Listen to me, love. If men weren't meant to ride dragons, then the Valerians would never have taken the eggs they discovered. And I'm pretty sure that if a meager herdsman who herded sheep can mount a dragon, then you can too. He told her before adding, dragons cannot be truly tamed, but they can be bonded with and trained. Valerian shepherds were the first to control them using magic, and rode dragons for millennia before the Doom, and they were not Targaryen or Valerian. Alicent clutched her cloak tightly about herself. And what happens if none of the dragons bond to me? What then? She asked, raising a brow. Then I'll get you an egg from the vault. He responded oh so sweetly, don't worry not, you'll be fine. Alicent huffed as she crossed both arms beneath her bosom. Fine, but if I die, then I am going to haunt you for the remainder of your days, after I haunt Rhaenyra first for being a lousy friend. She told him with a pointed look towards him as she poked him in the chest several times for good measure. This only caused the crown prince to laugh. He'd take it. When she dithered, he gave her another gentle nudge to spur her on, and then they were off, descending into the dragon pit together. You see, he'd taken it into his head to give her a dragon. And not just any one dragon. If he was able to get the grumpy lump of scales up and moving, he was sure he'd love Alicent. They were so alike it was almost comical. He sure was a timid beast when out of the pit, but when around those he trusted, he was as wily as they came. He was also the fastest of the dragons that the Targaryens possessed. Faster than even Melis when it came to sheer speed. After all, he was just as old, if not older than, the she-dragon, yet he gave as good as he got when it came to the things he wanted to do. If he could but make them meet. Perhaps if he pulled this off, so too could he make a miracle with Rhaenyra. How little he knew. While Naruto and Alicent were off to the dragon pit, Rhaenyra was elsewhere in the keep. Her anger toward the duo had reached an all-time high, and even now her thoughts went towards him in the hopes that by doing this she would get him to notice her. that he would finally look her way and realize the error of her ways. Cole wasn't much to look at in all things, considering that Naruto was a much more enticing specimen to look upon. Hell, even that portion was smaller than Naruto, and having fantasized it many times, she could say that the Kingsguard didn't stack up to her expectations in the bed. He was a pitiful lover and didn't really leave her satisfied despite having climaxed twice before the night. Now, that wasn't to say that Cole was a terrible lover, he was quite gentle with her. But she was just hoping for more. Everything. The consequences of this night would come back to haunt her in the near future, and her only regret was that she hadn't taken better precautions. Despite it being safe for her, there was always the danger of her being found out and potentially exiled from the house and her inheritance as Naruto's one true bride. Cole pulled himself up off her as he smirked. So, how was that, he asked her. She wouldn't answer the man's pawn's question with what she truly desired to speak, but she was honest nevertheless. I cannot say, you are the first I have ever brought to my chambers in such a fashion. She told him. Well, maybe another round would suffice to change your mind, he questioned. Or get the both of us caught, you beheaded, and me banished from my home. Get out before you are spotted. I will take care of the cleanup here, she told him as she pushed him off and quickly began to dress herself. God, she was sore. Fine, leave me to the wolves, why don't you? He grumbled. She was still caught up on her pompous Prince Charming. He'd change that soon. Naruto smiled as he looked at the keepers. Alicent didn't miss the questing looks they sent her way. One of them stepped forward as per custom and spoke to the prince. Fair day, my lord. What can we do for your excellency, he asked cordially. I intend to take my intended to the depths of the pit. I need to see her before I depart for some business, he told him, drawing a look from Alicent. What business, she said to him before the keeper could speak. This is the first I have heard such things. It's between me and your father, love. It's not like I'm leaving the kingdom for extended periods of time, he told her, calming her racing heart. Before she could ask otherwise, he looked back to the keeper. Take us down, he commanded the man. The keeper's eyes were wide in shock. Surely your excellency would prefer a much more gentle beast than that one. She doesn't come out unless she wishes to sun herself in the open. She'd kill her as soon as she laid eyes upon her, he told the prince. By the seven themselves, she has only come out one time in the last 20 years, and that was when you were born, my prince. Surely you realize the danger your lady will be in. There will be not anger, not with me there, he told him. Now take us down. That is an order. Why, yes, your excellency, the man stuttered. Naruto, which dragon are you introducing me to, she asked slowly. You'll see, he said calmly as he looked ahead, following in silence as he held Alicent close as they followed down the steps. Will you at least tell me this dragon's name, she questioned. When we get to her, he said quietly. Oh dear gods, which manner of dragon was he intending to bring her to? Taking a torch from the wall much like the keeper, he stalked forward. The dark tunnel seemed to lick the shadows provided from the flames, embracing the light in a strange harmonic eerie coupling. Their footfalls echoed through the dark until they finally reached the bottom of the tunnel, the deepest reaches of the dragon pit beyond what any other could have said to have gone before. Few living could claim to have laid eyes upon the beast that stayed at these depths. The keeper stood outside of the cavern entrance, staying outside the cut door in the stone. I know you plan on entering regardless, your excellency, but please don't bring her further than need be. You can still turn back before it is too late, he urged silently, so as to not wake the beast within. Never such a monster should be provoked. That is why I am going in first, he responded before he turned to Alicent. When you hear me call your name you may enter, but move slowly. Do you understand? She dared a nod. I'll be just inside the entrance to the pit itself. You'll see me clearly when you enter. A flick of his wrist ignited the torch just outside the cavern. Leave us, he ordered the keeper, who bowed nervously and quickly departed without a sound. Naruto inhaled deeply and went to enter, only for Alicent to grab his arm. Naruto, please, you don't have to get me a specific dragon, she told her beloved. It's enough that you broke custom and brought me here in the first place. You needn't risk your life. I know ... but this is the one I know will love you more than any other, he told her. I can feel it in my bones. I have to do this for you, so that we need not grow apart. Alicent shook her head. And what makes you so certain that this dragon will accept me, she questioned. I don't ... it's just a feeling I have, he told her as he gently tugged her hand off. I will always be here, for you, for our child and all our future children, he said as he turned and entered the cavern. His voice soon followed, but not in the normal Westerosi tongue, but that of High Valyrian ... and ... wait ... Was that insufferable oaf singing now, of all times? Drakari Pykiros, Alicent sighed as she placed a hand to her forehead. Of course he was. For some ungodly reason, everything loved hearing when Naruto sang. Man, woman, child, old, young, even beasts enjoyed his melodic voice, and dragons were certainly no exception to this. Supposedly Vermithor in particular had a special love for his singing, much like Silverwing did whenever he visited Dragonstone. Even Syrinx enjoyed it when Naruto sang to her. Hells, the young hatchlings liked to flock him when he sang in the dragon pit with a couple of the elders poking out to sing their own songs. Takamo Jamiro's, her lover, sang softly before his voice faded away. Naruto's voice echoed with each step as he delved deeper and deeper into the cave of the dragon he wished to garner for his beloved. A stairway in the darkness loomed before him as he continued to sing out to the beast. He could hear her muffled breaths, his small-minute movements as her scales raked across the stone of the cavern basin. Inlantis Bardosa, Selah Vides, he sang as he slowly climbed the steps to a flat altar-like base within the depths of the dark cave, the flames from the torches illuminating his figure and none else. Hen nua leni persisi vestridis si gelin urodax, he continued, but came to a stop upon hearing muffled groans from the beast, the warbling of her throat as she allowed him to know she was awake and listening to his song. Anagros he sung as he stopped, slowly placing the torch upon the ground at his feet. Her lowly warbles were higher in pitch as she gained his scent, that of her father's own off of him, a welcome smell of one whom she had clamored out of her hole to cry a welcome towards 2 decades ago, per zero udracy. Deep snorts and grunts of pleasure filled the air as both man and beast felt ease between one another, her approach giving Naruto pause in his singing for a moment as her warbled grunts drew ever nearer. Azimtos lihasi, herasa ledegan, he sang, and then the darkness was banished by a snarl and rush of flame as the dragon within unleashed her fire. A blazing silver-white inferno that melted the stones above and granted more light to their dark surroundings. And still, he continued to sing, allowing her to surround the both of them in glorious light and fire as she joined him in song. Ayaviden he spoke softly as the she-dragon stopped roaring and looked down upon him, the glowing rocks above illuminating the beautiful creature he had called forth with his voice. Imerat Jirilai he sung as she loomed over him, soft trills as she approached, a soft keen pouring from her maw, urging him to continue his beautiful song, Si Heros Bardosi, Promisasavali. He sang softly as she gave a low growl to him. Preening upon his lovely vocals, Jevidari he finished on a soft note as she placed her head down upon the stone, her blue eye gazing down upon him as he placed the back of his hand under her snout. Having never met this dragon unlike the others in the upper caverns, this dragon was unique among all others. Alicent, you can enter, he called out boldly and loudly enough for her to hear his words. Gathering her courage, she did just that. Her soft shoes scuffed softly across the stones as she entered the cavern while Naruto held the beast's gaze. Hearing her soft footsteps as she drew near, he shushed the dragon gently as she tried to draw away and pulled back slightly into the dark, her silhouette being all he could really see, but looking down, he could also see the telltale glimmer of a familiar group of objects. It made sense why she was so shy. They had never hatched after so many decades. She was still waiting for her rider to birth them with her. Alicent could scarcely wrap her head around it all. In truth, she wasn't sure she wanted to. Down she went, following her fiancé down into the crypt that held what would hopefully be her own dragon. There he stood, at the edge of the dais, a torch burning on the ground as he gazed ahead, and then a dark shape reared out of the gloom. Alicent jolted. Gods be good. But there were no gods here, only the might of dragons. Careful, now. Naruto took her hand in his own and touched a hand of his own to the massive dragon's snout. Don't make any sudden moves. He urged her. Yea, sure, when there was a massive dragon not even a foot away from her. Then, quite suddenly, Alicent found herself face to face with that very same dragon. What's her name? She asked softly as she tried her best to follow his instruction. Ithrak, lover of the winds, in High Balerion. He whispered back. Ithrak was a monstrous beast as she was gorgeous, beautiful as she was terrifying. Bigger than even the most stoic of the younglings, but as fierce as Balerion and as swift as males. While flying, she could bend her lithe body in such a way that she could increase upon her already impressive speed. A distinct feature of Ithrak is the various eagle-like body parts she had developed at a younger age. She possesses sharp talons enough to shear through stone itself at the ends of her feet, wide wings that look like they folded when diving, and streamlined spikes around her body that help her fly through the air at high speeds. Ithrak is noticeably larger than males and Vermithor and is currently the largest of any dragon after Vihager. Most of her scales are white, shadowing black ones that run down her back and neck with a few navy gray colored scales on the underside of her neck and tail. Her wings and frills are white-black mix, down to the wing bones which are black. Many of the scales on Ithrak's dorsal side, and most of those along her frills are dark to the point of being almost black, while her neck is striped with bright silver and black frills. Her eyes are blue. When laying down, her head is comparable to that of a carriage and easily matches it in size if not being slightly bigger. Ithrak lived up to her namesake lover of the winds, and while not so large as her lover's own Black Dread, she was still quite impressive, and oh dear, here she came. Alicent absolutely froze as the massive female dragon approached her. A low growl rumbled in the dark. It rattled her very bones. This close, she could smell the scent of fire and brimstone, but also another, fainter scent. What was that? She's protecting her eggs. Naruto warned her. Don't upset her. Alicent would have guffawed if she weren't so terrified. Don't upset her, he said. It was a little late for that. Ithrak would gobble her up in a single bite and there would be naught she could do. This time she did laugh, almost hysterically. Are you going to eat me? Then she demanded of the beast. Ithrak didn't budge. To hells with it. She only had her life to lose. Baby notwithstanding that major fact. Naruto would have Rhaenyra if that did occur. Even if she died, here and now, the two would have someone to support them. Plucking up the dying dregs of her courage, Alicent stepped forward and pressed both hands to the dragon's snout, just below the beast's nostrils, as Naruto had taught her when he had brought her to Balerion that fateful day. She felt as much as heard Ithrak inhale deeply, saw the precise moment the beast tested her scent. This was it, the moment of truth. She might accept her, which was all to the good, but if she didn't, well, it had been a good life. At least she wouldn't die a maiden. Abruptly, the dragon's growl died off. Was this it? Then the moment of her death would she die here? Oh dear heavens. Without warning, Ithrak had lurched, and quite suddenly Alyson found herself pushed as that silvery snout pushed itself into her chest. Her dragon trilled happily like a hatchling finding a long-lost friend. No fire came, no, only the faint musty smell of the beast currently nuzzling her. A long tongue flitted out, and oh dear, her newest companion had just licked her, head to toe. So much for her dress. Naruto rumbled a laugh. It seems she likes you. Congratulations, love. With those words, all the tension bled out of Alyson. Every bit. The redhead laughed again, softly now, despite herself. Was it truly that easy? What a lovely day. Come, we will fit her with a saddle and bond the two of you right away. And we can go flying together, you and me and Balerion and Ithrak. Upon entering the Red Keep, both Naruto and Alyson were welcomed to the sight of a massive feast and banquet that had literally come from nowhere. He could see his uncle mingling through the crowd. He had a cup of wine in hand, and he was being quite boisterous about something. Naruto had to blink to make sure he wasn't seeing things. What the he questioned. Where in the name of the seven hells did this come from? He asked as he looked at the equally shocked Alyson, who had felt her jaw drop in utter shock. What is his grace doing? She questioned. I have no clue, but I am about to go see if I can settle him, he said as he pushed forward through the crowd, excusing himself through the noblemen and women alike, with a few peasants carrying trays of the best prepared food in the seven kingdoms had to offer. He could see his uncle clearly now as he was before him. He stopped in front of the king as he grasped his shoulder. Uncle, what is going on? Where did this banquet come from? He asked. Ah, my nephew, the prodigal son of Westeros, graces us at last, he cheered as he toasted his cup high. Cheers for the heir of the Iron Throne, and shadow conqueror of the seven kingdoms, he who is loved by dragons, and subduer of Balerion the Dread himself, my heir and chosen son Naruto Targaryen. He cheered as people cheered happily and hoisted their cups up in celebration. Oh dear gods, the man was soused out of his mind. Your Grace, I think it'd be best if you took to your chambers for the remainder of the evening, Alyson called out to the king, hoping to calm the man down before he either hurt himself or, well, mostly himself. He was too drunk to present himself like a proper king should. Ah, as if we couldn't discredit the newest of our kinsmen, the king exclaimed happily. Praise the future queen of our lovely dynasty, the Rider of the Winds. Ithrak, the sole daughter of Balerion the Dread, and Merax is the Silver Queen, he called out as he hoisted the cup up once again. The woman whose fire within allowed her the privilege of siring the future heir of the throne, and riders of the dragons of House Targaryen. He laughed happily. You're soused off your arse, Alyson exclaimed in shock. Viserys was being extremely rowdy. The wine that a wine-bearer had just filled his cup with was splashing out with each movement the man made as he spoke, both boisterously and proudly, as if he had been the one to perform the deed with Hera. And he exclaimed, see that she has a dragon in her belly. A prince, I'd wager, he declared as he stumbled back and sat down roughly, the chair squeaking in protest. By the seven, he needed to stop drinking. Go to bed, uncle, you're drunk, Naruto grumbled out in a mix of annoyance and embarrassment, a hand rising to cover his reddening cheeks. Why was it always him that somehow managed to get pulled into these awkward situations? Viserys only laughed. And why shouldn't I be? Today is a day for celebration, he declared. More wine, more food, more music, he commanded with a joyous laugh that had the crowds cheer happily. Oh dear heavens, this wasn't going to end well for anyone. While Naruto and Alyson were trying to calm down their drunken king, elsewhere across the world things were about to change once again. As it stood, Lena Velaryon smiled in triumph at what she had dreamt coming true before her very eyes. After 3 years of that same dream near constant each night, she'd found her. It had taken time, but here at last, she was triumphant. Father couldn't naysay her now. She'd found her quarry, tracked her to this abandoned beach. Lena grinned like the child she still was at heart. Found you, Vihager growled and lifted her head to glower at the small human, sand sloughing off her back. Fire built in the back of her throat. No, she hissed in angry Valerian and thrust an open palm forward in the face of its flame. Obey, Vihager, yield to me. A low grumble sounded from the massive she-dragon, but she pulled back at the sharp words of the child, the flames within her maw dying down while the flames licking up her throat were swallowed without hesitation. Lena didn't hesitate to walk over to the ropes laid across her massive bulk and grabbed a hold of one, watching Vihager intently, the she-dragon watching silently to see her intent to mount her. The Eldworm silently praised her for her sheer ferocity to dare speak down her up to her, so she would allow the attempt. If she failed to mount the saddle of Visnia, she would fall, and she would die, and she would return to her slumber and await Balerion's call. His once weak flame had ignited into the raging inferno like that of his youth. Her clutched brother was simply waiting for the right time to call out to her, who knew. Lena took the settling of Vihager as consent, and grabbed a rope that led up to the saddle upon her back, and so began the first of many climbs. She climbed and she climbed, and climbed higher and higher still. The length was quite ridiculous, to be quite frank. Why hadn't she simply walked up the back of her wing, or up across the body? Aha, with an exhalation of exhaustion-filled relief, she clambered into the saddle, Vihager watching her silently as she did so. Massive wings pulled in, readying to pass off the ground, sand billowing from the movement. Lena licked her dry lips as she looked at the ropes strung to the saddle and slowly unwound them from the handles in place. The massive length of rope wound down around Vihager's neck, and Lena swallowed the lump in her throat as she prepared for what could either be the greatest moment in her life or the end of it. Fly, Lena commanded boldly. Vihager warbled a response as she turned to the human upon her back, sounding curious if the child truly wished to take the skies. Obey me, Vihager, she commanded. Fly, she ordered the dragon. A gurgled growl filled the air as Vihager pushed down upon the world. A massive foot lifting up off the ground, a wave of sand crashing down as the massive beast stomped down, shaking the world. A wing slid under her body as she pushed up, a crash of thunder from her standing tall in all her glory. Sand rained down upon the ground as Lena gawked in surprise, her body shifting in the saddle as Vihager rose to her full height. She remembered when she had seen Balerion land upon the grounds of the castle. He had shaken the world. He was larger than the Red Keep itself, and Vihager wasn't even close to being half the Black Dread size. But she should have realized that by claiming such a massive creature, she would still need to prove her worth to her. Sand was shaken from bronze scales, Lena gasping as she held on for dear life. Nearly being flung from this height would surely kill her. And then she was off. Vihager began to race ahead with incredible speed for something her size, surprising given she was big as a small castle. Then, her wings flared open, the massive feet of the Dragon Queen treading upon the earth filled the air like thunder, each step another crash that shook the heavens and rendered the earth. WHUMP, 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 and she began flapping her wings, claps of the storm filling the air before she pressed down upon the earth one last time before she took to the skies, a roar of triumph filling the air as she soared for the first time in decades. And Lena's cries of shock and terror filled the air soon after, her body nearly flung from the saddle as she held onto the rope with all she had. Don't look down, don't look down, don't look down. Vihager reached the height of the heavens in record time, the wind rushing through Lena's hair as she pulled herself up to the saddle and grabbed the handles upon it. Vihager snarled as Lena sat in her seat and pulled on the ropes, and she dove. Once more the young girl's cries filled the air. Not again. As they neared what could be the end of the both of them, Vihager pulled up, ripping a hill apart with her mighty feet as she pushed off once again, her powerful wings beating against the forces of the world. Lena cheered happily before she cried out and ducked into the saddle. Vihager had flown them through a flock of gulls, and had even eaten quite a few of them. Wings tilted under the light of the moon, dipping into the cool darkness of the waters right beneath her, stirring it up before she turned the other way and dipped the other wing down into the refreshing waters as she turned about. With a yank on the ropes, Lena had Vihager take to the heavens themselves, the dragon roaring in approval as she beat down, her wings ripping through the water on Preposterous, and then she was among the clouds. She had done it. She had kept her promise to Naruto. Oh, she could wait to see the look of surprise on his ROARG, Lena cried out as the world shuddered under the roar of another dragon. Vihager roared in response as the Dragon Queen turned about, and Lena looked up in shock to see the massive form of Balerion himself, flying next to a white dragon almost as large as Vihager. And upon both those dragons were people. Lena cried out as she waved to the massive beast's rider, a gesture which was reciprocated as Lena steered Vihager back around to join her brother and this unknown white dragon. The trio of massive dragons soaring across the heavens as elegant as any sight one could dream up. Landing, the trio of dragons lay down so as to allow their riders to climb off, and Lena rushed over when she realized her cousin was legitimately there to witness her claiming her dragon. Looking upon Balerion now, and gazing at Vihager, the girl realized that even with her immense size she was far out of her league compared to the Dread. Simply put, Balerion could bite down and rip Vihager in half without question, and this other dragon that flew with Balerion wasn't ridden by another Targaryen, but by a Lysant herself, made the young girl excited to know that another rider had been added to their numbers. Naruto looked upon Vihager in just as much awe as he would Balerion, his hand running across the preening she-dragon's snout as Ithrak nudged the other female in affection, showing that despite not being Vihager's hatchling, were both close with one another. Lena looked at Naruto and Lysant in slight confusion, but her curiosity held much of it at bay as she simply decided to ask him, "Tell me, cousin, what has brought you here to the other side of the world?" as she placed a hand upon her hip. "I am here to end a war." Naruto's tone said it all. With Balerion and Ithrak in the fight, we could pull the crab feeder from his lair and end this farce once and for all. The stepstones are in that direction last I checked, cousin, Lena stated as she pointed towards where her father and Uncle Demon were battling the forces of the crab feeder even now. "I know, but I couldn't help but notice Vihager in flight, and I had to see what had caused her to fly so strangely," he hummed as he looked to Lysant, who was giggling to herself as Lena blushed in embarrassment. I just claimed Vihager, she said as she began to lay into the larger male using her fists in the only way she knew would stop his tasteless humor, meaning that she began to punch him in the shoulder repeatedly. Naruto still laughed as she laid into him, but when he did calm down he looked to Lina happily. Well, I for one, am glad someone as kind as you could have claimed Vihager as their mount. Congratulations. Thank you, she said before motioning to Alicent. And what's her reason for being out here, she questioned, bonding her to Ethrek. Happened only a couple hours ago. I wanted to fly over and check in on my father before heading back to make sure that Uncle Viserys didn't wake up with that bad of a hangover. He answered honestly. And what has happened to King Viserys that has gotten him to act so strange? You'll find out, I'm sure, Naruto said with a shrug. Is it due to how Alicent managed to claim her dragon? Something like that. That's not an answer, Naruto. Lina scowled. I know, but I need to return Alicent back home before Otto sends out all the dragon riders to find her. And then I need to speak with him about something. He sighed. He was not looking forward to this discussion. Well, it was nice seeing you again, cousin, Lina said happily as both her cousin and friend departed. He failed to notice the last, longing look she sent his way. War was ugly. It was an unfortunate fact of life, one that often made Demon despair. The war in the Stepstones had been going poorly. He didn't deny that much, but now it seemed things would soon turn in their favor. Demon read the letter he'd been given, and he began to laugh loudly. He briefly considered burning it, but thought better of it, if only to see the look on Lord Corley's face. Much has changed in our absence, it seems, the former heir said jovially. Lord Balerion blinked for a moment, baffled. Demon handed him the letter, and his eyes grew most wide indeed. Your son has gone mad. Perhaps, he shrugged one shoulder. One of us often does. However, something rumbled above. It was their one and only warning. A mighty shadow swooped down out the clouds over them. No, not just one shadow. More. Dark wings blotted out the very skies. The silence that followed was a beauty, a blessed thing indeed. He resolved himself to savor it as long as he could. Balerion the Black Dread had come to the Stepstones in all his wild vigor, but not alone. And there, riding upon his back, the boy did so love his entrances. The earth shook as the massive dragon landed, causing many to stumble about as if they had been in their cups. My, how he'd grown. A curious pang tugged at his heart. Was this what pride felt like? Pride in his own? It had been years since he'd felt this stirring in his chest. Brave of you, boy, but foolish. He grinned at his son as he disembarked. I thought you would have learned your lesson by now. What can I say? Naruto's smile was shameless. I've always been a slow learner.